Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Children and Young People's Scrutiny Commission this evening. I would like to remind everyone present that this is a formal meeting of Hackney Council and all the constitutional requirements for council meetings apply. Please can I ask everyone to remember, whether you are in the chamber or connecting virtually, that this meeting is being held in public and being broadcast live via the internet. The rights of the press and public to record and film this meeting apply, and everyone present should note that media representatives may be in attendance or viewing the live stream. I would like to thank everyone attending this evening, especially our guests who are attending with the Commission's review of behaviour management. Thank you for giving your time to support the work of the Commission and joining us this evening. It's very much appreciated. So moving on to item 1, which is apologies for absence. Don't believe there are any apologies for absence. We've just got apologies for lateness from Deputy Mayor Bramble, who will be joining us at 8. Moving on to item 2, urgent items, order of business. As members may be aware, concerns have been raised about the changes to A-level provision at B6, which is now part of New City College. The Commission has requested that the Director of Education and Inclusion makes a brief statement about A-level provision on site and the future accessibility of A-level courses in Hackney, especially for those students taking non-traditional routes. So I'm going to hand over to Jason, who will make a 2 to 3 minute statement and will share with us some more information about the situation. Over to you, Jason.
Good evening, Chair. Thank you. Jason Morantz, Director of Education and Inclusion. So I'm just going to take you through some numbers about A-level places in the borough, looking a little bit wider than that to all post-16, and then talk about what was B6, which is now part of New City College. So the borough currently offers approximately, and this is an approximate number because it would vary a little bit each year, but approximately 2,000 A-level places. But you know, the number can vary depending on course demand and staffing resources. Currently, so these would be the most recent numbers. So for this year, there were 1,131 students enrolled on A-level courses within the borough. So that means that there's approximately 870 unfilled A-level places within the borough. So from a sufficiency point of view, removing A-level courses isn't an issue. There are other A-level courses should students be able to meet the entry requirements of those courses. So moving on. In terms of post-16 capacity, the most recent census data reveals that sixth form enrollment is relatively stable in a highly competitive environment in the borough. So the numbers for that, so this would be A-level plus, other options. There were 2,455 post-16 students currently enrolled this year in Hackney schools, the year that just ended. This is a slight decrease from about 2,486 in the 2023-2024 academic year. However, enrollment is projected to rise according to the numbers that Hackney Education hold to about 2,946 for the 25-26 academic year, and that's driven by an upward trend in year 12 enrollment over the past decade. And the numbers I'm sharing are part of a briefing that we're just getting checked, and then we'll be able to share that more widely. I think it's important to say that schools have varying admissions requirements based on several factors, including context, the size of the year 11 cohort, and the percentage of that cohort eligible for sixth form enrollment. To date, only 2 schools with the largest sixth forms have been able to attract a significant number of students from out of borough schools. Additionally, all but 2 post-16 settings now offer a vocational level 3 program, and several sixth forms provide GCSE retake programs in English and/or maths. And we believe that B6 was one of the schools doing that. So just moving on, in terms of looking at New City College and what was B6. So approximately 110 learners historically enroll onto A-levels each year at what was B6, which is now part of New City College. I think it's important to note that 24 students from that number, so about just over 22%, were Hackney residents. The 2024 A-level results, so this is a year out because we don't have the current results yet, showed a pass rate of 69%. That is considerably lower than the Hackney average of 98%. Furthermore, 49% of A-level students were classified as disadvantaged, and they achieved an average score of 25.25, and that was significantly lower than the Hackney average of 32.58. So students who would be described as disadvantaged by the recognized criteria wouldn't do as well there as they would in other Hackney schools, or looking at the Hackney-wide average. And just in terms of entry requirements, because I think this is a key point to all this, B6 entry requirements were 5 GCSEs, level 4 or above, and New City College have told us that the low entry requirement was a factor in their low pass rate. Other schools on average require 6 GCSEs and 5 with specific requirements for individual courses. So I think in summary what I'd say is this is a further education college, so they have the right to make these decisions that they make. I think we have a responsibility to ensure that there is sufficient A-level opportunities in the borough, which there are. I think we can see that there was certainly an issue around the entry-level requirements, so we need to be thinking about 2 things. One is how do we help students get to that level of entry requirement, or how do we ensure that there are enough opportunities and pathways for everyone, no matter what they choose to do. So there is learning we can do on the back of this, but I think in terms of the question that I was originally posed, is there an issue with A-level places in the borough? I would say no, but I'd ask you to take all that in the round.
Thank you very much. And just to mention to members of the Commission, we're not going to be able to take any questions for this. It was an urgent item. So what we're proposing to do is that we understand that there's a lot of interest in this area for members of the Commission, and that we're keen to sort of know what this means for our work as a Commission. So I think that Councillor Gordon and I will be setting up a meeting with Deputy Mayor Bramble and Councillor Williams to discuss this further. We will feed back to you all on what more we might be able to do as a Commission. I'm not going to take a question, I'm afraid. Councillor Binny Lovett's got a packed agenda today and I have to be firm. Moving on now to item 3, declarations of interest. So I have declarations of interest.
Thank you, Chair. In my capacity as mental health therapist, I work with the group on occasion. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Janine.
Okay. Oh, there we go. In my capacity as director at Listen Up, MOPAC, well, the Violence Reduction Unit, have commissioned my organisation to do a particular piece of work, although not in the borough of Hackney, still important to declare.
Thank you very much for that. And now moving on to the reason why many of you are here today, the substantive item on the agenda this evening, which is item 4, behaviour management and school inclusion. This is the 5th meeting of the Commission, which is dedicated to its review of behaviour management and school inclusion. It follows earlier meetings where the Commission has heard contributions from Ofsted, the DfE, Education Policy Institute, Coalition of Children and Young People's Mental Health, NEU, NASUWT, apologies for the acronyms, London Borough of Enfield, Tower Hamlets and Hackney Education. There are a number of contributors tonight, which you can see in the agenda pack, and evidence gathering, which is set out in the agenda and report pack. We've got a busy agenda. We've got lots of contributors. There's a lot for us to get through, and I think that we want to have the chance to hear as much as we can from you all. I think that you will really help to furnish our understanding of behaviour management and inclusion in schools. So I'm going to need to really tightly manage this session this evening. My colleagues here know that I'm not always the greatest at sticking to time, especially when we're talking about topics which we quite often are, that are very important to many of us. But just for those of you who are doing presentations, if you can assume that members of the Commission have read, have seen presentations and documents, and to keep your presentations as top line as possible so that we can maximise the amount of time that we have for Q&A afterwards. So with that said, we're going to go to the National Association of Head Teachers. So we've got James Bowen and Matthew Waterfall. They're joining us online from NAHT. Thank you both for joining us. We've got about 5 to 7 minutes for your presentation, and then we've got 15 minutes following that for Q&A. So over to James and Matthew, please.
Thank you very much. I'll start by checking you can hear me okay.
Yep, we can hear you.
That's a good start. I'm off to a flying start. Excellent. Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. So just very briefly, so you know who I am. So yeah, James Bowen from NAHT, National Association of Head Teachers. My role at the union is to oversee all our policy work, all our press. Head teacher of a primary school down in Hampshire. So I come with a sort of particular, I would like to think specialism and expertise, if that's not stretching it, in primary education is my context. So yeah, I've been given a couple of questions in advance to think about. So I'll only intend to take 3 or 4 minutes. I'll run through those and then more than happy to sort of answer any questions that people have as best I can. Obviously important to say we work nationally. So my role is a national role. In fact, it's England, Wales and Northern Ireland. But I think an awful lot of what I'll be talking about at a national level will be, I'm sure, very applicable to you in Hackney. So let me just go through a few things. I think one of the first things I was asked about was the impact of the pandemic. And it will be familiar messages, I'm sure. I think there's 2 big issues we've seen in terms of the impact of the pandemic, and this is very fresh in my mind at the moment. We're currently working with the COVID-19 inquiry on some of this, on the impact. So we've been looking at the evidence and thinking quite deeply about this recently. And to summarise, I think 2 things I'd flag. We've absolutely, and head teachers have absolutely seen an increase in the number of children starting school with emotional and social needs. So those children who are coming into reception or nursery, coming in with a greater propensity for emotional and social needs than we previously had, which probably doesn't come as a surprise, but that often then manifests itself in behaviour issues. So for example, what we see is children who perhaps haven't had the kind of social interaction in nursery, who are then coming into school without those social skills. Another key thing, I think, is children entering school with real delays in speech and language. And delays in speech and language can then often manifest themselves in behaviour issues. Children who can't make themselves understood or find it hard to understand sort of directions and instructions, that can often then manifest itself in a behaviour issue. Similarly, children who struggle to interact and communicate with their peers, that can often lead to frustration and present as a behaviour issue. So I'd wanted to flag particularly that kind of start of primary school. But then at the other end of the spectrum, I think with older pupils, what we saw was a sense of disengagement. And what I would say is children who were previously quite vulnerable to this. So pupils who who were struggling with attendance already, or pupils who were struggling to engage in school. I think the kind of pandemic absolutely kind of exacerbated that. And as you'll know from the data, some pupils just found it very hard to come back at all. And we're still struggling with the attendance around that. But others who kind of slightly lost that sense of value in school and disengaged from school and are still, after the period of time, still finding it hard to engage back into those routines and what have you. And then the final thing on this, which I would say, which I think is really linked to this, is what we've absolutely seen, I think, is a bit of a breakdown in the social contract between schools and parents. And I should say very clearly, that is not all parents. 95% of parents still interact with schools really, really well. But what we have seen is a growing small minority of parents who have kind of themselves lost that sense of value in school, are less worried about sending their children in, and sort of head teachers and school leaders reporting that parents are just a bit less supportive. So no, previously when the head teacher would have picked up the phone and said, oh, I need to talk about your child's behaviour, just not getting quite the supportive response from some parents. So I think that those are the 3 things I would flag from the pandemic that I think have been impacts. I was asked also to talk a little bit about the kind of particular challenges that schools are facing currently when it comes to behaviour. I think a big one that we hear from school leaders, and this is true, frankly, in all nations that we work with at the moment, it's that lack of access to specialist external support in a timely manner. So I think schools are pretty good on the whole at spotting and identifying issues quite early. It's quite rare for behaviour issues just to completely appear out of the blue. Occasionally they do. There might be a sort of particular family issue going on and that happens, but usually there's quite a bit of warning for schools. You tend to see at quite a young age. You can kind of quite spot early on there's going to be some issues here because maybe there is an issue with the speech and language, or maybe we're just seeing some problems. What schools are telling us is they want to get specialist support for these children. So that could be in the form of an educational psychologist. It could be speech and language therapy. It could be mental health support. It could be something like CAMS, the children and adolescent mental health support. But also it could be something as simple as a behaviour support team. So I know the local authority I used to work in, we had an excellent behaviour support team who would step in and do that early intervention work. So if we identified a child that needed that kind of intensive support, they would step in, they would work with the teachers, they would work with the child, sometimes even work with the family. Those teams are being cut back to the bone. And I can't obviously speak for Hackney. You'll know Hackney far better than I do, but I know elsewhere the frustration is schools saying, we've got a child, we've got a pupil here who needs support, but we can't get the help for them. And we know that if we could get that support in place, it could make a real difference. So I think that's the head teachers I speak to would say that's one of the biggest challenges they face at the moment. And of course, in terms of like, how do we sort of see this issue presenting in school? Because that was another thing, saying, well, what does this look like? If we're seeing an increase in behaviour challenges in school, how does that manifest itself? What are school leaders and teachers seeing? A few things I would flag there. Firstly, the sort of difficulties in self-regulation. So particularly young children managing their own emotions, managing their own emotional response. You know, it is normal for a 5 and 6 year old to get angry, to get frustrated. But some children finding it really hard to manage those emotions, and those emotions becoming kind of enormous and overwhelming and leading to bigger issues. So that ability to sort of self-regulate, manage their own emotions is definitely something school leaders are talking about. And I've said this already, but I think absolutely kind of handling relationships with peers. Now we could get kind of deep into why. My personal view is the kind of smartphone, iPad generation where an awful lot of children are far more used to staring at screens than they are interacting with others. And again, forgive me for generalizing here because it's not all children, of course, but I think, you see the kind of ubiquitous use of screens often for young children. That means that time is not spent practicing social interactions. And I think school leaders are saying they see that, and linked to that is, again, it sounds a bit cliche, but it's true, that kind of very limited attention span. Because I think if from the age of 2, you've been presented with a screen that gives you something new every 10 seconds, bright flashing lights, there's that kind of rapid stimulation, then having to deal with a classroom, which perhaps isn't quite so rapidly stimulating, is quite a shock. So I think, definitely that kind of struggle with attention, that self-regulation is absolutely a problem. And to some extent, just the kind of simple following of directions and classroom routines. If we've all been to school on this call, I'm sure that a lot of school is about routines. It's about fitting in. It's about sort of doing things at a certain time, everyone else, and finding that really challenging for all sorts of reasons. And I'll finish up with a final thing, and hopefully time-wise I'm doing okay. I think one of the things you asked me to just consider was, okay, well, what kind of approaches are schools taking to behaviour? And it's interesting because I think this has had a lot of publicity in recent years. And a lot of the publicity, I would say, focuses on either end of the spectrum, if you like. I don't want to call them extreme approaches. That's perhaps not fair, but kind of the more unusual or the different approaches to behaviour policies are the ones that the press gets interested in. So that's the ones that get flagged. And I think it's important to remember, I think the vast kind of majority of schools that I'd speak to take what I would call a pretty balanced approach to behaviour. They make sure that there's a clear behaviour policy in place. Children are recognised and rewarded for positive behaviour. So the positive behaviour is spoken about. The values are spoken about. When children display that, they are rewarded and encouraged and praised for that. And at the other end of the spectrum, there are clear consequences for bad behaviour. And I like the word consequences. I always use that with children, which is I think consequences is better than punishments. I used to say there is a consequence to all your behaviour. If you choose to do X, the consequence will be Y. And I think that's, basically the kind of approach that most schools will take. What I think it's fair to say we have seen in recent years, though, is probably a growth in slightly different types of behavior approaches. So you've probably heard these talked about. It's the kind of thing that press would talk about as a kind of zero tolerance approach to behavior. I suspect very few schools would describe their approach as zero tolerance. That's probably not how they would describe it. I've heard it described as sort of warm strict is another way of talking about it. But that will be, if you like, schools that focus very, very much on the kind of the rules being quite inflexible, kind of sweating the small stuff, you know, making sure that the kind of children follow the uniform rules very, very carefully. You know, quite, if you want in kind of colloquial language, quite strict behavior policies. I think we see those more at secondary than primary. If I'm honest with you, you won't find many primary schools taking the kind of that strict end of the scale. It tends to be something we see more at secondary. But again, I need to emphasize that is not all secondaries. It is some. I think we've also seen a growth, well, not a growth, but a greater focus on perhaps, you know, for want of a better phrase, at the other end of the spectrum, kind of different approaches to behavior, things a bit more like sort of restorative approaches. And restorative behavior policies focus less on sort of, if you like, the kind of rules and the punishments, the colloquial term, but focus more on restoration, putting things right. So if a child does something wrong, it's how do you fix this? How do we make this right? And that takes quite a lot of work. It's quite an intense way of dealing with behavior. But schools that do that, you know, there's many schools that say it works really well for them. And I suppose that would be my final thought on this. I don't come here to suggest there is a right or wrong way to do behavior management. I have my own views about how I did it as a school leader and how we worked on it, but I don't think there are necessarily, within reason, they're not right and wrong ways. You know, I think that basically it's what works for your school, and I think having the things that matter is having a very clear policy, a policy that all teachers understand and know, that you kind of implement consistently. Behavior is always a problem when you've got 3 or 4 teachers sort of going maverick and doing their own behavior policy, and that doesn't fit with everyone else. So sort of consistency is really important. One of the phrases I used to use with teachers is the certainty of the sanctions much more important than the severity of it. It's not about how mean the sanction is. It's the fact the child knows if I do X, Y happens. It's a consequence.
Sorry,
yeah,
James.
I'll leave it there. Is that okay?
Cut you off there. I'm really sorry. We've just got so many contributors this evening. I think the members of the commission are keen to ask questions of both you and Matthew this evening. If you don't mind, we're going to take 2 at a time. So if you've got a pen at the ready, I'm going to kick us off, and then Councillor Sosarunga, and I'm going to note the other hands that I've seen up. I suppose I wanted to ask a question around what you mentioned about the different challenging behaviours that schools or leaders are referencing, the leaders that you're working with. I'm wondering what you attribute the disparity, I suppose, between what that looks like in terms of exclusion levels, because if we're thinking about the London context, we've got lots of areas where you've got high concentrations of children who experience a lot of, you know, a lot of childhood poverty. We've got, in particular, in East London, and, you know, home insecurity, living in temporary accommodation, various different challenges. Why do we have some local authorities with very small, low levels of school exclusions and others with much higher levels of school exclusions, when presumably the context, the behavioural context, would be fairly similar? What is that attributable to? Councillor Sosarunga, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. My question is around supporting improved engagement for parents and carers. Could you give us a bit more detail about how you support that? And also how you support, and what I see as a very important issue, of a more inclusive curriculum. Thank you very much.
Can I leave those 2 with you, please? And can I also ask members of the commission to indicate again if you want to ask a question, because I've lost count. Okay, great, thank you.
No problem. So let me take those in order. So why the differences in exclusions? It's difficult to answer that. I think, yeah, most exclusion decisions are made at a school level rather than a local authority level. So schools may have within their behaviour policies different sort of expectations for when exclusion is the right route to go down. So there is no national guidance that says if a child does X, that means you should exclude them. So there's nothing that says, child punches another child, that equals exclusion. Schools are largely left to sort of determine for themselves through their behaviour policies that their governors should be signing off what constitutes a level of behaviour that should lead to exclusions. So there could be something around, frankly, different behaviour policies with different kind of expectations in terms of where schools set that bar. That could be something. Sometimes we do see where if a school's been really struggling, it's had a bad Ofsted, things are in a bad way, often you see a sort of bit of a spike in exclusions when you get kind of change in leadership, when the school's trying to get back on its feet. And I think that's a mark of perhaps the school leaders trying to get grip of things again, trying to make sure that, pupils can learn safely and what have you. And if things have broken down, you sometimes get a spike there. But yeah, I think you're right. I think where you're seeing roughly the same socioeconomic backgrounds, the same circumstances, it probably does come down to sort of judgments that are being made within school. Although I suspect local authorities are probably also working with their schools to sort of talk about where exclusions are too high, we need to correct that, or if they're too, having those conversations as well. So I think that would be my thoughts on the first one.
Can I dive in there, James? I think as well there it may be, and obviously it's difficult to answer without knowing, the kind of profile of the children that are being excluded and the specifics in the borough. But certainly I think a factor will be the level of support staff in a school as well, and the access to support that children have. The ability for a well-resourced support team to intervene, calm things down, have that kind of that quiet word kind of thing, that is often very helpful. And obviously what we've seen over the last 15 years are significant cuts across the board, and in many schools where there are significant funding challenges anyway, that has seen redundancies of support staff. So I think that probably, I'm not saying that is the reason, but I'm saying it certainly could be a factor, I think, in why there is that differential. Sorry, James, to cut in.
No. I think it's a really good point. I'm glad you made it. I think that's right. I think if you have a school that has a really strong pastoral staff, that has, some schools talk about having kind of inclusion spaces where they have staff to work with pupils on a sort of one-to-one basis or a small group basis if they're struggling to cope in a class, but you need the staff to do that. And if you are a school that's budget is, you're really struggling with, you just may simply not have the staff. So I think that's a fair point. I'm glad you made it. On the second one, the thing around the inclusive curriculum is really interesting. So obviously schools have to follow the national curriculum. And you'll know that in 2014, the previous government launched the new curriculum. And I think that led to some real challenges. So the previous government was sort of unapologetic about raising the bar, making it a much more challenging curriculum, and move away from coursework towards terminal exams, for example. If you look at sort of English GCSEs, a much stronger focus on sort of 19th century literature than modern literature. And I think for some young people, that's been really tough. I think some young people have found that the curriculum doesn't feel as relevant and engaging to them as it could be. And I think that's really tough for schools because they have to follow the national curriculum. At the moment, academies have a degree of freedom, but the government is saying that the national curriculum will apply to all. We do have a curriculum and assessment review, which is currently live, a national review that the government has called, being led by Becky Francis. And I'm quite hopeful she'll be looking carefully at that, about how do we make sure the curriculum is as inclusive as possible. Because I think it's fair to say there are some children who look at the sort of the curriculum and the exam system as it stands, so this is really tough. This is really hard for me to access. And I think that does have an impact. And I think the older pupils become, the more that of an impact that has. I think I'm going to struggle to answer the other question because it was about how we work to kind of improve engagement for parents. Well, obviously, we're a union for school leaders, so we don't really do that work directly. We don't work with parents in that way. We do work with organisations like Parent Kind who do work with parents. And obviously we speak to the government about what could be done to try and improve levels of engagement, but we don't work directly yet with parents as a school leaders union.
Thank you very much. I think I've got 6 names, members who want to ask questions. It looks like we might have a 7th, and this item was supposed to be finished in 2 minutes. So we're going to have to do quick fire. I'm going to be really firm, guys. So we're going to have to be quick fire questions, quick fire answers, so that we can get through as much as possible before we move on to the next item. Councillor Gooch, followed by Councillor Tebbit-Deloff, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested in what you said about the loss of perceived value from different groups, particularly with respect to parents. What do you see as the causes of that, and what can school leaders do to re-establish that value?
And then Councillor Tebbit-Deloff.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your report. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on, and the work from your organisation on the issue of high turnover of head teachers in schools. Probably most of us in this room have experienced that in some capacity or another, where there is either not consistent leadership in schools for our children and young people. I would like to know if there is any work that you've done around that, and any mitigation on retention issues, incentives, if there are any, and most importantly, how does that impact school behavior policies? Thank you.
Over to you both.
Okay, I did cut out quite a lot in that second question, so I've only got bits of it. The first one about the loss of value, I think a lot of that was around the time of the pandemic. So we saw sort of parents saying, well, look, my kids missed some weeks of school. They were okay, didn't matter so much. So what does it matter if we take them out for the odd day? So I think the broader stuff as well around kind of that general sort of loss of respect for kind of authority figures, if I'm honest. You know, you see it's the same across, you know, A&E, where we're seeing increased numbers of assaults on staff, police, schools. I think there has been that kind of slight loss of kind of respect in authority figures, and I think we see that coming through. You know, we've got numerous reports of head teachers being physically assaulted by parents, spat at, attacked. We just didn't see these things 10 years ago, so something has broken down there. I probably shouldn't get too deep into the societal reasons for that, but time is tight, so that's that. The second question I struggled a bit to hear, but I think it was something to do with sort of like inconsistent practices from school leaders.
High turnover of head teachers, James. So I mean, I can probably come back a little bit on that. I mean, we do have a concern as a union about you know, the attractiveness of school leadership for you know, for people coming through the ranks. And I think you know, we have seen an increased number of head teachers leaving the profession, and it touches on the previous point as well, you know, the previous question, which is around the kind of respect for the profession and the education system. And I think you know, I think the previous government, if we're being frank, probably spoke about teaching and about schools. They weren't as positive. I don't think the rhetoric that we got was reflective of actually the outcomes for children, certainly in London, where educational outcomes are very high and have been for some time now. So I think in terms of head teachers leaving the profession, it is a very, very stressful job. You know, we've seen significant reductions in resourcing. We've seen significant challenges with SEND, you know, an exponential increase in the number of children presenting with SEND. At the same time, we've seen a fragmentation of the education system, and you know, we've got local authorities without any money to provide the services that used to be provided, and that's kind of created a bit of a perfect storm in the education sector, just as it has in other parts of the public sector, whereby many of our members are feeling incredibly stressed and under pressure, and are thinking, actually, maybe it's time that I stepped down and went and did something else. I think in terms of individual examples, we couldn't talk about those here, but I think, you know, being a senior leader in a school now is a very, very difficult job to do, as it always has been, but the support that they used to get has really withered away.
Thank you very much. I've got questions for Councillor Gordon and Janine, please.
Thank you very much for coming this evening and outlining the you know, the considerable challenges that head teachers face in doing their roles. So I fully acknowledge that in the context of this question, but what I was going to ask you was, what would be your response to head teachers being directly accountable on a school level for levels of exclusions? Because while fully acknowledging the challenges for schools and teachers, there is really compelling evidence that being excluded from school has a devastating impact on young people's lives. And supplementally to that, how should head teachers work with local authorities in relation to bringing these numbers down, and what sort of support? I mean, I know you've indicated in relation to resources.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. Janine, please.
Hi there. Thank you so much for your reflections and perspectives. So I'm really interested to understand more about, from your perspective, how school leaders are taking on anti-racist and anti-discriminatory approaches and how that intersects with schooling exclusions. If you can share any insights, that'd be grateful.
Sure. I'll try to be quick on these. So on the first one, I would say school leaders are incredibly accountable for the level exclusions already. So having been on the receiving end of many Ofsteds, when you sit down with the Ofsted inspector, one of the first things when they're looking at behaviour is how many exclusions have you had? Can you justify them? If my exclusions were above the national average, they would want to know why and what had happened and what I was doing about that. If my exclusions were high and not coming down, I would probably be marked down for that because I wasn't having a positive impact. So in a sense, I don't have a problem with them, with school leaders being accountable for that, but I would sort of say they very much are. What I would be worried about is layering on layer upon layer of more accountability, because I don't think that will change much. Excluding a young person is a horrible thing to do. I only had to do it once on a temporary basis, and it was horrible. I don't think any school leader comes into school in that morning going, "Oh, I'd like to exclude someone today." I think it's always a last resort. You don't want to do it. So I don't have a problem with them being accountable for it. They are accountable for it. But I think and I know the question didn't mean this, but I don't think the solution is let's beat school leaders with a big stick to get the exclusions down. The question is, how do we reduce those challenging behaviours so school leaders don't need to lose exclusions would be absolutely crucial. That sorry, I'm really skipping through this, so apologies if it's coming across as short. I would go longer if I had time. The anti-racist approaches is really interesting. So as a union, we have just passed a motion about 6 months ago asking the government to ensure that all school leaders have sort of anti-racism training as part of their school leadership training. So when you become a head teacher, you do a thing called MPQH. We think anti-racism training should be part of that. So it's a campaign goal of ours at the moment. Again, very short answer for a very long, complicated question, but I hope that gives you something.
Just in London, sorry, just very quickly on the second question. I know in London as a region, I manage the London region. Anti-racism training is something that we push across local authorities. I know Hackney has done some work on that, and indeed we've been involved in that several months back now. So it's definitely something that we are supporting and pushing.
Thank you very much for that. The final 3 questions, I hope that I've got everybody down. So Councillor Charlton, Councillor Ross, Councillor Binney-Lovett. You pass, okay. In which case I might come in with a final question. So Councillor Ross, Councillor Binney-Lovett, please.
Thank you, Chair. It was great to hear about the campaign, including the motion that you've submitted. I just wanted to hear if there's anything more that you'd like to see the government doing to kind of just do more in terms of behaviour policies and inclusion, and if you think that the current guidance that is available is sufficient and consistent enough. Thank you.
Councillor Binney-Lovett, please.
Yeah, similar area. You mentioned behaviour policies could be part of the differences in exclusion rates, and I assume the same is true for other consequences such as detentions, etc. So I'm wondering if there are any issues around standardisation or inclusion, and what are you hearing from your school leaders about how we can improve behaviour policies to be more inclusive and support mental health of young people and the well-being of teachers?
And I suppose that just a final question for me, which is about the facts that, well, certainly I can speak in relation to Hackney around, we have some of the highest exclusion levels in London. And most of the exclusions of persistent rule breaking. So I personally struggle with when we say last resort, and I hear last resort combined with persistent rule breaking, in particular if that's considered low level, when considering the points that Councillor Gordon mentioned about it being exclusion having such a devastating impact on a child's life, being permanently excluded for persistent rule breaking, which we also heard from contributors from the teachers' unions talking about. They didn't come into education to be giving children detentions for dropping pens on the floor and walking into a class with a coat on, but that's what they are having to do repeatedly. So I wondered what, and perhaps that speaks somewhat to your point around zero tolerance behaviour policies, which I think we have heard people feel that that is the case in many of the schools in our borough. So I wondered what your thoughts were on exclusions for persistent rule breaking and
Sure.
sort of last resort. So sorry, that's a bit of a long one.
No, it's fine. No, I get it. It's fine. And let me do them in reverse order. I'll come to that last one first, because I think it's a really important one. I mean, you've probably been able to glean from my kind of conversation this afternoon where I stand on that sort of on the kind of behaviour approach. You know, I'm not someone who goes in hugely for zero tolerance. I'm not someone who believes a child should be given a 45 minutes of detention for dropping a pen, for example. So yeah, that's not something I would be supportive of. What I would say though is just be a bit careful in equating persistent rule breaking with very, very low level infringements like that. Sometimes it might be, but also, let's give you a scenario. Persistent rule breaking could be you're a child in a year 5 class. Every morning you come in and teacher says sit down, and one of the kids just stands up, says no, goes around knocking all the kids' books off, says to the teacher, I'm not doing anything today. Teacher has to spend 15 minutes going out the class with that child. All the other children aren't learning. Teacher comes back in, the child's outside, kicks everybody's coats off. That would be classed as persistent rule breaking. So there is a spectrum, is what I'm saying. So I think just be careful not to necessarily assume persistent rule breaking is the very, very minor infringements. In some cases it might be, but it could be reflective of some genuinely disruptive behaviour. And I think we're absolutely right to say exclusion can have a really negative effect on children, which is why I very rarely used it, if I'm honest with you. But we also have to remember that a child stopping all the other children learning has a really negative effect on the rest of the children in that class too. So if we had a child in a class and they got to the end of the year and the teacher turned around to you and said, your child's made no progress this year, I'm afraid, because I was so busy dealing with behaviour stuff, we would all probably say that's not okay. So you're absolutely right. No one wants to exclude children, but we probably should not lose sight of the other children in the picture as well, I think. So that's that one. On the stuff around kind of guidance, what else we want the government to do, I think a massive thing for me, and the government, in fairness, I think is starting to do it, is the early intervention stuff. So it is really hard to solve a problem when the child, young person I should say, is 15. Things are so ingrained at that stage, sadly, that fixing it at that stage is really, really, really tough. So I think the early intervention stuff, like children in nursery and year R, spotting the issues there, getting the support in place, which is why the government's talking about kind of relaunching Sure Start, in a way, calling it Best Start. That stuff I think is really important, because often in nursery we've spotted these issues. Let's get the support in then, and the chances reduce so much of exclusion being needed when they're 15, because we've dealt with and we've addressed those issues, put the support in place much earlier. So just constantly for me, it's around early intervention. I'm less excited around guidance, to be honest with you. Schools are drowning in guidance. So there was a head teacher recently, there was an article in Schools Week, he put all the guidance head teachers have to read from the DFB into ChatGPT, and it said if he read them non-stop without sleeping, it would take him 17 days or something like that. So schools are drowning in guidance, behaviour, RSHE, PSHE, extracurricular stuff. So I'm not sure just giving more written words to head teachers is going to be particularly helpful. I think it's about that support, it's about the early intervention, all of that sort of stuff.
Could I just jump in there? Sorry, James, and
yeah,
I won't keep you. Early intervention, there is, if we look at a borough like Southwark, for example, which has a significantly lower level of exclusions, I understand, than Hackney does. And if we look at the level of support they have at their early years, some large maintained nursery schools there, they've got those multidisciplinary teams around the child. A lot of the children then are getting the support around speech and language, ed psychology particularly. Oh, I'm not sure if you can hear me. Yeah, you can. Sorry, my screen went a bit funny there. So they're getting all that early intervention, and actually many of the issues that James describes, those things that become ingrained challenges later down in along the line, are unpicked there. We've seen huge reductions in ed psychology, SALTs, all of that stuff, around 1/3 to 40% in the last 10 years. But if that investment is made in early years, it really pays dividends. So I really can't emphasize that enough. Sorry, James.
I think probably I've run way over. I don't know. Do you want me to stop there? I don't want to take up your entire agenda.
I think there was Councillor Binny Lubbock. Was your question answered?
I think it sort of covered it with guidance, yeah.
Okay. In which case, thank you both very much. We have gone over, but it was an area that I think there was a lot of keen interest in, and I especially want to thank the two of you for stepping in, because I know the plan wasn't necessarily for the two of you to join us this evening, so I really do appreciate you joining us and contributing towards this item. Thank you both. We're now going to move on to hearing from contributors from the Mayor's Violence Reduction Unit. So I would like to invite officers from the Mayor of London's Violence Reduction Unit to present on their work to support the Inclusion Charter. We've got Coraline Burge and Ella Keeley from the VRU, who are also accompanied by their partners in this work from UNICEF, Nature UK, Attachment Research, Community and Virtual School. I've put here that we've got 25 minutes for a joint presentation. As members of the Commission have got copies of the presentation, can I ask for this to be very top line so that we can save some time and so that we can have some more time for questions and answers? So if we can trim that down, if possible, to 15 minutes, so that we can hopefully stay on schedule. So yes, over to colleagues from the Violence Reduction Unit. And welcome, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting us to join you this evening to share the work of London's Inclusion Charter alongside the evidence and the research and our partnerships that sit underneath it. My name is CJ Burge and I head up the Education and Parenting team at the Violence Reduction Unit. Next slide, please. Thank you, Martin. So the Mayor set up and funds London's Violence Reduction Unit. We take a London-wide prevention and early intervention approach to tackling violence. Our strategy has been hooked in the evidence of what works to make sustainable changes, and it prioritizes working in education because we know that children and young people are safer when they're in schools. We know that exclusions and suspensions are risk factors for children and young people becoming vulnerable to exploitation and being affected by violence. So for example, there's new evidence that showed that in the last 12 months after being excluded, children are twice as likely to be convicted of a violent offence. We also recognize that the world since the pandemic, as we've been hearing earlier, has been forever changed. So even more so for children and young people, where we're seeing declines in mental health, emotional well-being, and their ability to regulate. So working with schools, we also understand the crippling pressures that they're facing and how these are colliding with the growing inequalities and the growing number of additional needs. And unfortunately, levels of suspensions, exclusions, and persistent absenteeism continue to, on the whole, rise. So more worryingly for us is of those children who are losing out on learning, the disproportionate number who are living in poverty, who are from minoritized ethnic backgrounds, who are care experienced and are struggling with their mental health and have special educational needs. Next slide, please. So a little bit on London's Inclusion Charter. What I've just talked about paints the really complex picture of the challenges to children thriving. And that is why last year the Mayor of London launched London's Inclusion Charter. It's really a London-wide commitment for change. It prioritizes education that's fully fair, inclusive and available to all young people. And really importantly, it was developed with young people alongside consultations with over 200 education, charity and borough leaders in every single borough. It's underpinned by research on the feelings of safety and belonging of young people, but also we spoke to parents and teachers from all London boroughs across primary all the way through to alternative provision and secondaries as well. At its core, the Charter is 4 guiding principles, extremely high level, so everyone can get behind them. The first one is about embedding equity and diversity. The second one is students as active citizens. The third one is about being adaptable and reflective. And finally, it's about going beyond academic achievement for the children of London. And importantly, it's underpinned by relational values, care and nurture. And I think our charter should be seen as creating a framework and a strategy for London. It has the ability to be flexible. It's able to adapt where schools and boroughs are on their inclusion journeys. And it's certainly not a one size fits all. It's bespoke. It has to be led by boroughs and schools. And we're absolutely clear that our role here as the Violence Reduction Unit is only to support and to influence, and that it is the schools and the boroughs themselves that know what's best for their areas. So this final slide from me is just a bit on the impact. So 1 year on, we've got nearly all London boroughs who've signed up to the 4 principles of the Charter, and it's also supported by 30 national charities. Next slide, please. It hasn't changed on my screen. Thank you. The Mayor has also invested over £12 million of investment, and that's continuing to have a range of impact through different interventions and targeted support. And you'll be hearing a lot about that today. It's also really important that, you know, for us, that we're seeing great take up. So in the first year, we've already had 650 schools that are on their rights respecting journeys, and that's about a 75% increase, and that reaches over 100,000 children and young people. And that's just one element of schools getting involved in an approach to be able to support them on their journey around inclusion. We've also learned a lot of lessons along the way about how you make meaningful, sustainable change in schools. So, you know, it has to be a whole school approach. You know, we need to be able to support school leaders and provide quality, high level development. And we also need to be able to promote promising practice. The beginning journey of London's Inclusion Charter was around spotlighting practice and making this a positive narrative. And ultimately, change takes time. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Ella to speak about the research that underpins this.
Thanks, CJ. So as CJ mentioned, we wanted the Inclusion Charter to be really shaped by London's young people, but also families, parents and carers and teachers alike. So we commissioned the University of Bath, who did a piece of research for us asking Londoners what is important for belonging and safety in school. And as CJ mentioned, the research heard from nearly 4,000 people and across primary, secondary, PRUs, alternative provision and representation from every single London borough. Next slide, please, Martin. So this is a brief summary of some of the main themes that came from the research and really informed those 4 guiding principles of London's Inclusion Charter. We asked about a range of different types of safety, physical, social and emotional, and all students responded and identified that emotional safety was most important for feeling a sense of safety at school. What also came out was a concept of around fairness and the importance of respectful relationships. So the majority of students identified having school rules that are fair as important for their feelings of safety, and that's primarily around emotional safety. And then reflective of that, teachers and parents and carers also conceptualized safety primarily as emotional. They identified a lack of flexibility to meet the child's needs and negative relationships between staff and students as a barrier to feelings of safety, which really resonates the idea of fairness emphasized by the students. And then they also identified pressures and stresses experienced by young people as another barrier to feeling safe at school. And factors identified as important for increasing a sense of belonging included respect for social identity and diversity, a real focus on peer relationships, and then individual identity building and affirming. Next slide, please. So to support schools and local authorities to create an action plan based on London's Inclusion Charter and to start to operationalise some of those learnings from the research and good practice, we recently launched the strategic guides. These guides pull together the original research we commissioned alongside additional resources and evidence support to support education leaders to implement the guiding principles. The guides were co-designed with borough and school leaders and include a range of case studies from across London. Over 50 resources and organisations are also signposted, and there's an audit tool to support decision makers to reflect on their strong practice, share it, focus future action. And boroughs are really using these guides to inform their strategic decision making and funding, as well as integrating them into their school resource platforms. Next slide, please. So you'll be aware from the briefing pack the range of VRU investment in education in Hackney. So I won't spend long on this slide, but happy to take any questions on this afterwards. Next slide, please. And London's Inclusion Charter is all about partnership and a collaboration. So we've also included opportunities to work together in the briefing pack, including taking up funded opportunities for schools, sharing practice and inclusion strategies through various forums. And then the bottom two opportunities you'll hear in more depth from our partners. So without further ado, I will hand over to Aarti Sharma, CEO of Nurture UK.
Thanks, Ella. I'm taking it as a given that the slides have been read and seen. So Martin, if you don't mind going to the next slide, please. Lovely. So Nurture UK is a charity that's been around for over 50 years and actually started in Hackney 50 years ago by an educational psychologist. And we fundamentally focus on children's social and emotional development. So it's quite interesting, James talking about earlier about the impact of the pandemic and what they were seeing coming through the schools. That's what we do and have been doing for the last 50 years. We focus on doing that. Martin, if you don't mind going to the next slide, please. Everything is based on our 6 principles of nurture. You can't see the graphic so clearly, but hopefully you can see it in your pack. Everything that we do is based on the 6 principles of nurture. And a lot of people have heard all behaviours communication, safety in the classroom is about transitions. It's about the language that you use. So what we do is we don't directly work with the children, but we work with the adults who work with the children. And we always say adults because in the school environment, there are different roles, and the different roles within there will work with the children in different ways. So we train teachers, Senkos, head teachers on the 6 principles of nurture and embed those practices within the school environment. What the impact or the approach that Nurture does has had in the schools that we worked in, and we work with just over 5,000 across the UK, we have seen an increase in attendance, a drop in exclusions, an improvement in behaviour. And 2 things that we hadn't intended in our original theory of change as a charity, but 2 positive aspects we've seen is high staff retention within the schools because staff feel nurtured as well. And there's also been a better relationship between parents and the community and carers because the parents feel cared for. What we have found organically that the schools that we work with have high pupil premium, social deprivation, high levels of SEND, SEMH. However, through all of those barriers, they actually thrive in a nurture school. The whole community does because of the approaches that we take. Now, the starting point, and Martin, if you don't mind going to the next slide, please. We carry on, actually, I won't go to that slide. The next one, that's the one, perfect, thank you. Our starting point as a charity is the Boxall profile. We focus on early identification of young people's social and emotional developmental needs. And we advise an adult who knows the child well, goes through and answers a series of questions to really understand where the child is at. And it's really looking at the barriers to learning. What is it and why is the child not engaged? What has happened to outside of school that's impacting on their learning. So it looks at the cognitive, social and emotional development and how that influences learning. Then from that, once the tool has been used to identify the need, the tool itself then throws out a range of lesson plans, approaches, ideas and language that the teacher needs to use to move that child forward and to make sure, that they're engaged back into the classroom. And that's fundamentally why we exist as a charity. It's about getting young people to thrive. And we work with all children. We don't segment them based on SEND or SEMH. All children deserve to be nurtured in the school environment. And what we want to do and have been doing is bringing that joy back to teachers and for children. We want children to be happy and create a sense of belonging, and that's what really Nurture is about. If you don't mind going to the next slide. that's very much identifying the types of sort of needs that Boxall profile has. Now, we believe, and what we have been doing for the last 50 years, but more so in the last 5 years, is we believe that we've been giving schools the confidence, the language, the resources and the approaches they can use to support behaviour in their schools, i.e. to get to understand the why and how through the Boxall profile, and then through a range of whole school training that we provide. We also then have seen an increase in attendance from with the work that we do in the schools. And for us, it's about getting people to understand why children behave the way they do, because I fundamentally don't believe a child goes into a classroom or school to say, I'm going to act up. And I fundamentally believe a teacher didn't become a teacher because they feel that, as James said, they will exclude a child. And really, we're giving everyone the tool and the language they can use to support their children. The other work that we've been doing as a charity is that as the government has been stepping up in terms of the language, talking about a sense of belonging, talking about inclusion, we have created an APPG, which was set up, we are the Secretariat, which was set up early this year, and it's focused on inclusion and nurturing education. And we hope through that, and the MPs involved in that, we'll be able to really elevate that inclusion is absolutely a no-brainer. This is what we need to be having in our school system today. It's about creating and focusing on relational practices. And we have also got a working group which is made up of 30-40 different charities and organisations, and that focuses on inclusion and relational working. So there's a whole sort of system change that is happening, and we have been working with several boroughs across London. Some of those boroughs I've included in the report, and our big focus is about creating an inclusive environment. And how you do that is about training the staff to be able to use the right language and approaches. It's about understanding the children, and it's about creating an environment that people really want to be there. And I've had, anecdotally, I've had the privilege to go to 4 different schools over the last 2 weeks: a rural school, a city school, a large secondary with over 1,000 pupils, a primary school in South London, one in North London. If I close my eyes, they could all be the same school because they all live and breathe nurture. The children are happy. They have reduction of exclusion in their schools. They are passing their exams. Each of those schools, their children are hitting above national average in their academia. So for me, social and emotional development and nurture goes hand in hand with academia. If you get the social and emotional development right, academia will follow. And that's sort of a snapshot of nurture. The rest of the slides really talk about the impacts that we have and the different schools that we have. So I won't really talk about that in detail, but it might come out when we have Q&A, and just want to make sure my colleagues get an opportunity to speak to. I wasn't sure who's after me.
It is I.
And sorry, just to say that
Martin.
Oh, sorry, I didn't catch that because I just interjected just to ask if we can keep the rest of the presentation brief, please. Hoping to move to Q&A. Apologies for this. It's no indication of any lack of desire to go through them. It's just that members of the Commission have seen the
of course
the slides.
Completely understand. Thank you very much for having us this evening. I'm Martin Russell, the Programme Director from UNICEF UK for the Rights Respecting Schools Award. We're very much, as it's similar to what Artie was saying, a whole school approach. But what we bring that's different but complementary to everything else, and I think this is why the VRU chose to work with UNICEF UK, is that we underpin the rights element. We bring the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which was ratified by UK government in 1991, but hardly known by any teachers or professionals working with children and young people. And worse than that, hardly known by any children and young people. We hear a lot about children saying, I know my rights, but actually most of the time they don't actually know what their real rights are under the Convention. Our aim is to change that, and in so doing, to change the culture and the relationships and the ethos within the school. Because by bringing a child rights approach, we empower the voice of the children and young people, and we frame the culture in the school to bring a real focus on mutual respect for everybody else's rights. It's not just about knowing and claiming your own rights, but recognizing what the rights of everybody else is and asking the question, how do I then act towards you? How do I show respect for your rights, and what's that going to look like in our relationships in school? So if we could hop to the next slide, please. We use the framework of learning about rights, then living and learning through rights, and it's in that middle space. Once you know what rights are, you start to ask yourself the question, well, how am I with other people? How does my inclusion of others support their rights? How do we do the conflict resolution piece? You've heard a lot about restorative practice. It was mentioned earlier. If you bring a rights narrative to the restorative dialogue, it's saying, well, when that happened, how did that affect her rights to privacy or her rights to her identity? And you can start building the future based on how you might go forward and respecting other people's rights more strongly. The empowerment piece, the voice for children and young people, for adults to recognise that it's the right of children and young people to have a say in all matters that affect them. So we've actually got schools right across the UK where senior leaders consciously engage children and young people in the school improvement conversation, talking about the real big stuff that matters. How can we make learning and teaching better in our school? Children co-create the relationships and behaviour policies with senior leaders in many of the schools with whom we work. So that idea of active citizenship, of becoming agents in their own lives, is really what transforms children and young people's perception of life in school. So if we could hop to the final one, please, just briefly to share with you that this is so impactful. It sounds a little bit daunting for adults at first to think, hang on a minute, are we sharing the power here? Whose school is this? Well, actually, that's a key question, isn't it? Whose right to an education is it? Whose life is it? It's everyone respecting everybody else's rights. So a little thought to perhaps leave you with. Locally to yourselves, we heard recently from a head teacher who was explaining why they'd chosen to become a rights respecting school. And they actually cited the awful circumstances of the child queue situation, but said after that had happened, in my school, I wanted all the adults to really know what rights children had. And I wanted them to become powerful advocates for the children in our school. And we wanted the children to know and understand their rights properly so that their lives could be strengthened and empowered. So in becoming a rights respecting school, we're looking at transformation and change for children and young people, but it's a change in relationships. And I guess the key question really is, how do we want to be with each other? I've deliberately avoided using the word behaviour because I think relationships are the real question. How are we with each other? And those are the sorts of questions that get explored in the rights respecting journey. Sorry, that was very high level on whistle stop, but I hope it gives you a flavour.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Andy Wright. I'm currently chair of the Attachment Research Community, but I'll give a little bit of context of my professional experience. I have had over 30 years of leadership across the education system, including as head teacher and the principal of secondary, and I've been the virtual school head teacher in 2 local authorities before I retired a couple of years ago. So chair of ARC. I'm also a trustee with the West Midlands Virtual Schools Foundation. I represent virtual schools in the Association of School and College Leaders, and I volunteer on 2 governing bodies. So what I'm going to say now is to try and pull some of the strands that we've been hearing tonight that may be translatable into the needs across Hackney. So the first, I'm assuming you've seen all the slides, so I won't show this clip here, but the clip is from an outstanding school, Ofsted Outstanding School. They've got above national average in all of their outcomes for all of their groups. 1900 in the school, so it's a large secondary school that serves a highly diverse and disadvantaged community. So really, really good work. Now, some of the strands that have come out have talked about pastoral and expertise across schools. I believe that the way forward and what we're trying to help model and support across the Hackney schools and across London schools is about having highly skilled all adults within that setting. So it's not a case of you have to go down to somebody to get fixed and then come back into the mainstream setting. It is about having highly skilled, highly trained professionals right through the whole of the school community. That means it's a really tough gig. And this clip here talks about the journey that school's been on in the context they're at, they serve and meet the needs of all the young people, all of the staff and all of the families in that local community. A very, very impressive piece of film there. The next couple of slides talk about what language we use in schools, and we've heard that, some of that from previous speakers, but this is about your school culture and ethos, and it's moving away from a compliant point of view into a relationship based. And so that second bullet point about, is it my school, your school, or our school? Our school's really, Martin's just said this far better than I can, but it's really, really important that everybody belongs to that setting. The next couple of slides talks about our mission statement. There's a couple of documents further on from that I want to highlight, because again, what we're pulling out from today is how we need to connect across the system. So if we do the next slide, there's a document called Engaging Our Children, which I recommend people to have a look at. It's on our website, it's free to download, but that is about connecting for all our young people across education, health, social care and criminal justice. We are working in a system with very limited resources, so we have to make sure we complement each other, support each other, and make sure that there's no gaps and there's certainly no confusion across both the young people and the professionals. The second document I want to share with you, something built on from what Artie's been saying about the terminology that we use across the system. And again, if you're not necessarily a professional in the system, this picks out all of the work practice. We've heard trauma informed tonight. This document has been pulled together by a group of professionals under the umbrella of relational approaches, and I think that would be really helpful for the discussions and considerations you're taking across London and Hackney. So the four groups that have been working with this are Nurture UK, Adoption UK, and the National Association of Virtual School Heads, which Patrick will pick up on in the next bit. Going to the London context on the next slide, this is about modelling, it is about raising awareness, it is about challenging, it is about supporting. So there's a range of different initiatives that are taking place, continue to be developed. So first of all, we've had our second annual conference for the region. And we've had 300 professionals from right across London and beyond that have come together. Now, the title for that event is done in consultation with the workforce, with the leaders within the workforce, and some of the issues. And we've heard a lot about inclusion tonight. So we've been, with our keynote speakers, looked at that and looked at some solutions and some challenges to our school leaders in a very supportive environment. And a key part of that is about networking, it's about pulling people together. That brings us to the ARC Learning Hubs. That is identified centres of good practice that you can share. So that's the Learning Hubs have both online webinars and also face-to-face. The face-to-face is to fit in with the strategic approach of that borough. So around whatever Hackney would do, that's why we'd build it around there. We've got a range of colleagues that are joining us as ARC ambassadors. So again, good practitioners. So there's one in Barking and Dagenham, for example, who's a primary head teacher and also links in with Nurture UK. So there's a lot of connectivity in this. The Trauma Informed Champions is to complement the work that's been led by the VRU. And then we want to learn from all that with the case studies, which I think is really important. All of this package, all of this modelling, all of this pathway creating is to create sustainable development so that we're going to get more inclusive schools throughout. And one of the concerns I heard earlier on was about why are we excluding so many young people? It is a different times now. We need different tools and different approaches. This is not a soft touch. This is a very, very highly skilled set of professionals with clear and very high expectations and high aspirations for all of our young people. And this is about meeting their needs. So the last couple of slides is just talking about how we're trying to into a local, a regional and a national community. So there's a flavour of what ARC's about and how it's trying to contribute towards the improvement development of London and Hackney. Thank you.
Is it me now, Andy?
Thank you.
Yes, I believe so.
So, hello, colleagues. I will be brief. I'm Patrick Ward. I'm head teacher of Lewisham Virtual School. I'm also past chair of the National Association of Virtual Schools and special advisor on the Education Select Committee for Children with a Social Worker. I believe colleagues have spoken already about the context of, I think, what the Violence Reduction Unit are proposing, which is a move to a relationally safe model away from a behaviourist model. I think I'm just here to give a brief flavour of something that's already happened in Lewisham around that. As a Londoner, I think I'm confident in saying that the context in Hackney and Lewisham are reasonably similar, the river notwithstanding. I think we're dealing with similar challenges, and what works in one place could work in another. The starting point, I would say, is that there has to be a public value proposition that comes from a local authority. So we know we're not in a command and control relationship with schools, but there has to be a position where a local authority says this is something that we believe in and that we would like to support schools on a journey towards that position. A lot of these presentations start with, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. I believe the opposite. I believe we do, because the wheel's not turning. The school system, I am arguing, and we've experienced this in Lewisham, is not meeting the needs of vulnerable learners. And there needs to be fundamental change to even begin to achieve that. And what that fundamental change looks like, the journey we're trying to take our schools on, is you abandon a behaviourist way of looking at things. And that is quite a radical proposition. That's not incremental change. That's saying that you abandon the concept of rewards and sanctions as a way of creating a scenario where young people can learn. It's our position that that is not going to happen. It never will happen, no matter how effectively or consistently they are implied. You have to create a scenario where the school becomes about relationships. It's not a quick win. It's something that's going to happen easily, but it's something I feel in Lewisham that we are somewhere along the journey to. So we've made that position to our schools. We've asked schools to take that position. There hasn't been a school in Lewisham that has said no to that. There hasn't been a school in Lewisham that has not said we would like to at least attempt to go on that journey, to try and look beyond that way of looking at things to a relational based way of looking at things. That includes alternative provisions, pupil referral units, SEMH schools, mainstream schools. We're not offering schools a quick win. This will not improve your results anytime soon. It won't even necessarily reduce exclusions. I don't personally believe in attempting to reduce exclusions or suspensions. My experience is that creates a scenario where there's a black market, where people try and game the system. You will see exclusion in other ways. Time does not permit me, even if I had an hour, time wouldn't permit me to tell you all the ways that schools do that, but there are many. In my experience, schools that talk about low exclusions levels are excluding in other ways. So what we've abandoned any concept of targets around exclusions. We're trying to reduce exclusion. Young people are in schools and learning. Whatever you call it, managed move to the proofs, for example. Section 29 directions would be another one. I could go on. These are all ways of excluding. So we need to move beyond the official, I think, mindset of there is a particular way of excluding that we want to reduce. So we feel it's working, and we feel our young people are achieving. It's a model that people have looked at. It's a model that so far we haven't had our schools objecting to. We have lots of different schools in Lewisham. We have faith schools, we have faith academy chains, we have some of the national academy chains, and we have maintained schools. We're not seeing a particular difference in how they're responding to that. Now, as colleagues in schools will be able to tell us, if you're going to have a high challenge model, which I think is one that I'm describing, you need a high support model that's commensurate for that. The local authority has to buy into that. The local authority should be doing that, in my view, via the virtual school. What works for vulnerable learners, children in care, ultimately will work for all learners. We are going to get a greater remit to do that post the Schools Wellbeing Bill. In the meantime, we can begin by being the change we want to see. This is an open offer to all colleagues in the room to have a conversation about how we're doing this in Lewisham, to come and visit us. Not for a minute am I saying we've got this right, that you will see perfection in Lewisham, but I think you will see the beginnings of a journey, and it's a very explicit journey. We are rejecting behaviourist approaches in schools. We're rejecting normal concepts of what consistency looks like. Consistency and accountability, as they are applied in schools, are wrong. They make schools less safe, not more safe. They create the circumstances whereby extreme incidents are more likely to happen. So we're moving away from that. Relational practice works. All the evidence says it works. Let's have a conversation of how we can make it better across London. There you go. That was great.
Thank you very much, Patrick, and for each of the other contributors. Now moving on to Q&A from members of the Commission. Some of you may have questions that you would like to put to our officers from the Director of Education, for example, in relation to our work supporting the priorities of the Violence Reduction Unit as it relates to the Hackney context. Can I ask for those questions to come at the end, and we begin with questions that are directed at the Violence Reduction Unit and the partners who have just shared about the work that they are involved in and the organisations they work for. Members of the Commission. Okay, I've got Councillor Charlton and Janine. I'm going to start with 2 questions at a time, if that's okay, please. So I often recommend having pens at the ready. If others can put their hands up, just so that I can jot their names down also. Councillor Charlton.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everyone for the presentations. We know that children's lives at home have a huge impact on their behaviour. So how does the work that you do in schools link to children's lives at home, and, you know, where there are issues, help improve those relationships?
And Janine, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. In terms of the VRU, what do you see as your responsibility in ensuring that there is oversight of join up between the commissioning, the organisations you commission, to ensure that when we're thinking about the work happening in Hackney, that they do interlink and they are joined up? I heard earlier you were talking about the inclusion charter and saying, look, it's the responsibility for local authorities, etc. But in terms of this particular work, where you are commissioning organisations to carry out work in the borough, what would you see as your responsibility to assure join up?
Thank you very much. I'll come to the bit about our responsibility and then maybe open it for Artie and Andy and anyone else who want to come in on the impact of home life. So it is absolutely our responsibility to ensure that the Commission services work and have an introduction to the local authority teams. We see the local authority as key to place-based decision making and strategically being involved in supporting their schools, and therefore, particularly in Hackney, we've done a lot of work engaging with the education team and going through the education team in order to access schools. So, because we've heard from schools that often they can get hundreds of approaches from organisations, and they really need the local authority to be able to structure that offer, because, you know, at the end of the day, a head teacher is so busy, they're only going to really open 4 emails, and that's Ofsted, national government, hopefully from the Director of Education or from the education team, and therefore we don't want to complicate that. So I think it's really important that we're working with the local authority, and sometimes there have been challenges because we understand how stretched the education team has been, and to be honest, how many offers are probably coming at them. So I think a kind of approach to working with the voluntary sector and then also with the VRU would be really welcomed, and we'd really, we've put a lot of recommendations about how we can support the local authority team and offers that we could do, learning from where this has worked really well in other local authorities where they've taken the inclusion charter alongside the VRU, but to their schools to think about revising a strategy for the local authority. So happy to share some of those examples afterwards.
May I jump in and just share a quick thought around the parent-related question about home and family? I think 2 thoughts come to mind. Firstly, that children's rights aren't just from 9 till 3:30 while they're in school. Children have got rights, obviously, 24/7. So we encourage schools to engage with families in a dialogue about what those rights are and what it means to respect rights. Interestingly as well, under the Convention on the Rights of the Child, parents are actually rights holders too. And there are many articles in the Convention that actually raise for parents an awareness that they have got rights to be supported in all sorts of different ways by public bodies. And many schools I've worked with actually say when the parents realise how rights are supposed to work, it can be really empowering and supportive for them and enabling them to access other services and to engage more positively with school. And it does influence the relationship between parents and children. On multiple occasions, I've actually met with parents when we do school accreditation visits. Parents who say to me, my daughter kept coming home talking about rights, and now I understand it a bit. And it started to change the way I parent. And for me, that is incredibly powerful. So there's a real dialogue to be had in the parent-family space. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to jump in.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in terms of from Nurture UK, we often talk about a virtual backpack that a child will come in to school with. So you don't know what's going on at home, what they're dealing with. And so this invisible, it's not a virtual, sorry, invisible backpack they'll come in full of stuff that's going on. And our approaches in terms of how we work with the schools is trying to unpick and look into that invisible bag to make it visible either through the use of box or profile, but even just about the relationship. It all goes back to what Martin, Andrew and Paddy were saying. It's all about relationships, essentially. It's about building those right from the beginning, right at the school gates. And that's where the language community starts from. So we often talk about how you need to make that invisible bag visible and knowing how to help the child support it and take out the stuff that's going on at home with emotional regulation, the tools and language they need to be able to engage with their peers, with their schools, with their teachers, with their parents. So it's a lot of work. And again, as I agree with Paddy, it's not an overnight thing. It's not rocket science either. It takes time and a level of consistency to work with. So that's how we've done it at Nurture UK in terms of what we've seen in schools in terms of the behaviour manifesting and the tools and approaches we give schools to be able to break that down.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Tebbit and Councillor Binny Lubbock.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, and for clearly the passion that you have in seeing an end to school exclusions. We really share your passion and the frustrations too. In relation to the Inclusive and Nurturing Schools program, the report notes that Hackney schools have been difficult to engage, and a high proportion, I believe 60%, of those which did sign up later disengaged. My question is why do you think there is a low engagement and a high dropout rate among Hackney schools in the program, and what can we learn from other boroughs? Thank you so much.
Councillor Binny Lubbock, please.
Thank you. My question is really for the partners, and I suppose a bit for the VRU. All of this relationship work sounds like it absolutely is the way that we should be moving when thinking about behaviour and moving away from behaviour as being potentially the focus. But I do worry a little bit that it's not entirely clear where who's going to be spotting the gaps, and in terms of the rollout of that, like what are the metrics? And I know we don't necessarily want to focus too hard on metrics and targets, because as you rightly say, Paddy, metrics and targets can lead to trying to game a system, but without certain kind of metrics, then we don't necessarily know whether something's working or where those gaps are and whose responsibility is to fill those gaps. And so I'm also wondering if the VRU is able to sort of monitor the take-up of the Inclusion Charter, and is there anything that it reveals about the take-up across the London boroughs and across London schools?
I can off on the sort of monitoring element and then hand over to partners on the metrics, maybe Paddy as well, and then come back to the INS questions. So monitoring the take up, obviously we are looking at ultimately long-term is exclusions and suspensions and driving that down and seeing attendance increase. But we're a year out of data in terms of the data that we get through from the DFE is from a year ago. And therefore, you know, we are starting to see some initial trends of where boroughs like Lewisham, Camden, Islington, Haringey, all very on the front foot with relational approaches, with working very strongly with their schools, with having that kind of strategic leadership that Patrick talked about, seeing drops in suspensions and exclusions from the most recent data, and that's really positive. We're not contributing that to the London's Inclusion Charter, but that is what we will be following as we work alongside boroughs to be able to implement some of those approaches and work with their schools to create that high trust, high challenge environment as well. Hand over to Patrick now. Thank you. And then
an excellent question from colleague, because you quite right. While I'm questioning the current use of metrics, you cannot abandon them. That's fundamentally what we have to work with. CJ, that's Coraline to those who don't know her, has outlined why that's an issue if you're looking at the central data, because it's always a year out of date. Your virtual school has the tools available to provide real-time data for vulnerable learners. So that's on a week-by-week, day-by-day basis. So you as a local authority have access to that. That will give you key data that will inform your operational practice. So, for example, if you start with the attendance data, a child is in school or they're not. They have a DFE number next to them or they're not. They're CME, they don't have a school. By the way, there's thousands of young people who have a social work category at the moment who are children missing in education. You can all see that data. They're accountable to you as counsellors. So that's real-time data that's available to you. So that's a metric you start from. If they're not in school, why are they not in school? Yes, you have formal exclusions, fixed-term permanent exclusions. What about all the reasons why that child is not showing up in the school at that time? These are questions that you and other local authorities fundamentally should be asking. This is an accountability measure for people like me who have an operational responsibility to deliver on that. Every local authority should be monitoring that as the highest priority to reduce exclusion, in my view.
Can I just add to that as well, please?
Yes, sure.
So a couple of reflections from the second question there is, if I talk to school leaders, there's a really strong view that they cannot be held responsible for all of the challenges that exist for young people. That's exactly where the Engaging Our Children paper came from, because it is about how do we get strategically education, health, social care and criminal justice working together at a local, regional and national level. So Artie mentioned some of the APPG groups that she'd been linking with through Nurture UK. That particular paper is going through another APPG group with the Restorative Justice Council. So we are trying to model some of that. Everything that ARC has represented tonight has been trying to look at how the national and the regional picture can influence some of the local picture and model it, support and help develop it. And that, I think, is, it's not a short-term fix. This is a medium to long-term journey that we all need to go on in order to become more inclusive. So there's some of the reflection from that.
Thank you very much. Got questions from Councillor Suso Runga and Councillor Gordon, please.
Thank you, Chair. In the Inclusion Charter, the guiding principle, Foundation 1, putting children's rights first. And one of the synergies of the Inclusion Charter is about amplifying the voices of children and young people. So I would like to hear about actual good practice. How is this being done in practice? We're talking about children. I want to hear their voices. Can I have some examples of good practice? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Oh, I'd also really like to thank all the speakers for giving time this evening and for the, sort of passion and commitment that comes behind your contributions. I think it's been really, really helpful to us as a commission. I just I mean, just a really brief comment. I mean, obviously we've been talking about exclusions this evening, but I mean, I think exclusions are just the canary in the coal mine, really, in terms of children who aren't thriving at school. I mean, the vast majority of children won't be excluded from school, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're thriving. So it's really, you know, good to hear some, you know, possibilities, because I mean, that's the, you know, that is one of the driving forces behind this review, really, is that we want to sort of identify good practice. So I think, sorry, I know I've spoken, but I think my questions really may be aimed primarily at Patrick. We heard earlier from the National Association of Head Teachers about some of the challenges that head teachers face. I mean, what you and colleagues on this call are calling for is a really radically different approach. How would you speak to head teachers about, you know, the risks involved in these approaches, and you know, what, you know, particularly head teachers of schools that are seen as successful academically and well respected? You know, how would you overcome the barriers to them maybe taking the different approach that you suggest?
Sorry, can I come back with that? Yeah, you need to show that you are absolutely with them on managing that risk. You need to demonstrate they are not going to be left alone to manage that. That's where the public value proposition from the local authority comes in. Zero tolerance policies, behaviourist policies, policies that are tariff-based and managed via an app, they create risk. The relational policies that we're talking about, they mitigate against risk, as long as head teachers realise they're part of a network which is going to support them with that. That's why if you can get borough-wide support for a attachment-based formula, such as what's provided by the attachment research community, head teachers feel more empowered to take more radical positions to mitigate against the type of anti-relational policies that are creating risk. But you've got to show some courage from the local authority to do that. That's why a high challenge, high support methodology is necessary. So I don't believe, I mean, echoing what colleagues said earlier, head teachers no head teacher wants to go into the job to do that, but they tend to behave like that when they feel they've got no other option and it's the safest thing to do when they're left managing the risk on their own. If you send them the message of that's not the case, and you back that up with a genuine local authority offer, you're going to get completely different behaviour from head teachers in all different types of schools. That's my genuine lived experience for being a head teacher, virtual school in Lewisham for 10 years. Happy to continue that conversation with colleagues of how that might work in practice.
Martin, we'd like to come in on the rights examples.
Yeah, thank you, CJ. Yeah, that was a great question about the voice of children and young people and practical examples. I think first thing to say is the importance of that voice and how the challenge is there for all adults, I think, to have a shift in mindset away from the seen and not heard mentality of the past. A nicer way of looking at it, perhaps, is to think of children and young people as human beings, not human becomings. So they're here now with us in their own right. Let's listen to their voices, which doesn't mean, oh, miss, we want a swimming pool and all the sort of ridiculous suggestions. It's about educating children and young people to exercise their voice in a powerful and meaningful and relevant way, and recognizing that they will genuinely be listened to. And that's being listened to in terms of safeguarding, in terms of speaking up if something awful has happened, and feeling that because it is my right to have my voice heard. And we certainly know that safeguarding referrals often go up when a school engages with children's rights properly, because that sense of empowerment. But it's also that shared ownership of whose school is it, when their voices are heard and they become players in the game. So it's not, as I said, getting all the things they want. It's about entering into a dialogue and realizing that their voice is taken seriously. Some things can't happen and that can be explained, but some things can improve. And increasingly we see in really good school council engagements, for example, where they move beyond the sort of simplistic asks and start talking about significant things in school life, where a leadership team are open to genuinely listening and potentially changing practice because of the ideas of children and young people. And what comes with that is trust. And trust is at the heart of relationships, and that reinforces everything that's being talked about this evening. But the adult has got to be the adult in the room sometimes and take those initial steps. I have a theory, I met didn't mention I was in education prior to this role as a head teacher and teacher for many years. The best colleagues, in my mind, the outstanding teachers and leaders, are the ones who can actually change what they're doing and have the humility to do so in response to what children and young people are saying. To be able to go into your maths lesson and say, that was rubbish yesterday, half of you didn't get it, did you? I'm really sorry, how can I improve it? What should we do today to do better learning together? And not every teacher's in a space to do that, unfortunately, but a rights approach encourages them in that direction.
Can I just build on Martin's beautiful answer and just say, in terms of specific examples, you can look on the London RRSA website. There's lots of head teachers talking about the way they implemented it, why, the change it made. And also in terms of boroughs' approaches to children's rights, we have a lot of boroughs who have strategically committed to include it in their inclusion strategies, such as Camden, Lewisham, and even in Ealing, where they have a funded role as part of their learning partnership that is leading on rights respecting schools for the borough. So seeing again that leadership from a local authority level to say this is really, really important. We've also seen that, I know the question may not have come up, but around racial equity, embedding equity, diversity is the first principle of the Charter. And we've seen boroughs who have committed to that, have funded a role and who journeyed alongside schools to support them, really, really make a difference in implementing anti-racist and unconscious bias approaches in schools.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ross? No? Any other questions from the Commission? I did want to ask a question about the investment in Hackney, quite specifically. So, and just how this compares to other boroughs. So in terms of outputs and outcomes, how does Hackney compare to other boroughs where the VRU has invested? And what benchmarks or markers does the VRU use to assess the effectiveness of its work across boroughs? Noting that I think it's roughly £400,000 has been invested, significant investment in Hackney. So just wondering what this looks like across the sort of London context.
Thank you very much. We can send you a borough profile and a breakdown of that. I don't have those figures to hand. And in terms of benchmarks, and in fact, like all of our programs there's a strategic sort of analysis that is done along all different forms of data from that lead into deprivation, thinking about how children thrive, obviously for the education team around exclusions, but particularly around suspensions, because we're trying to support boroughs to take approach analysing the data around suspensions more than permanent exclusions, because really that's pushing it upstream and understanding the trajectory that leads young people down that road. So we can follow up with a sort of a borough analysis if that's helpful.
Be very helpful. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for the Director of Education? Councillor Ross and then Councillor Gordon, please.
Thank you, Chair. The report notes that the Hackney Virtual School's not signed up to the attachment or the ACS partnership across London. Could you tell us what the reasons are for that? And I've noted as well that 20 schools, I believe, have signed up to the RSA currently. What are we doing to encourage more schools to sign up to that initiative? Thank you.
Taken Councillor Gordon, please.
Got actually a similar question in terms of the Inclusive Schools and Nurturing Schools programme in terms of engagement at a school level, where the report says that Hackney schools have been difficult to engage, and 60% of those who did sign up later disengaged. I just wonder whether you've got any reflections on the low engagement and high dropout rate among Hackney schools, and whether there is anything we can do to learn from other boroughs, and if there's anything the local authority can do to support engagement.
Should I jump in that one, the last question?
I think we were hoping to put these questions to the Director of Education for Hackney initially. If you have any further contributions to add afterwards, then I think that they would certainly be welcome. Thank you.
I'm happy for you to come in on the last one because I'm afraid I didn't hear it. Sorry, Councillor Gordon. But in terms of the first one, I'd have to look at why our virtual school hasn't signed up to that attachment program. But I can tell you, having worked in the borough for 7 years in different roles, the virtual school's been offering attachment training to local schools since for a good 5 to 6 years. But I can look at that particular program. There are others, and that offer is still being pushed out to schools. And there has been reasonable take up over the years, but we can look at the most recent numbers for that. Sorry, Councillor Gordon, I didn't hear your question, but we are signed up to the Violence Reduction Unit charter, and it would be helpful to have that profile set, but I know anecdotally we have a number of schools involved in the different programs, especially rights respecting schools, and we have some good examples of where that's gone very well. I think we have one of the first nursery gold schools, one of our special schools that signed up, and there is more work to do there, certainly with our secondary schools. So, Councillor Gordon, I'm happy to hear the question again.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some great work in terms of children's rights done in Millfield School in my ward as well. So I know there has been good work done in Hackney. So my question was in relation to the Inclusive and Nurturing Schools programme. So our papers say that Hackney schools have been difficult to engage, and 60% of those who did sign up later disengaged. I just wondered whether you knew why there's been low engagement, obviously at school level rather than local authority level, and a high dropout rate among Hackney schools, and if there is anything we can do to encourage further engagement as a local authority and learn from other boroughs.
I don't know the specific answers. I'm happy to look them up, but from my previous experience, we've engaged many of our schools in these programs. And we have had significant opportunity, which I'm really grateful for. I know anecdotally schools have said sometimes if they're managing more than one program, that can be a logistical burden. But I think, you know, this is always about choosing the most appropriate ones that are going to make the biggest impact, and then supporting schools in order to stay on them. So I can look that up for you.
Thank you very much. Artie, did you want to come in, and then I'll bring in Deputy Mayor Bramble?
Sure. I mean, the sort of anecdotal conversations we've had with schools, it has been that I think they felt that the programme was done to them. We had some really strong borough leads who were very interested in the programme, but when we tried to engage with the schools, they found it quite overwhelming, and they had too much of other things that they were doing. The other borough leads, boroughs that we've worked with where we've had high success rate, there's a really close relationship with the schools and the borough leads, and we held networking events where they could come in and drop in and find out more about the program virtually as well to make it easy for schools, but there was just no engagement or understanding of what the program is. Whereas the other boroughs, we worked very closely with the borough leads, and they were able to talk about the program and really engage with the schools. So we tried so many different methods, different approaches to reach out to the schools, but they just were not interested. And I don't know whether it's because of the relational approach. It's a different mindset, and it's very much about what Patrick was saying. It's about really sort of saying that this is a way that works and it's evidence based. Yeah, and different. Yeah, I think the school culture played a big part of it. It was just very much a closed door, not wanting to engage. Whereas other schools and boroughs where they might have been using behaviourist approaches in the past were very opening to trying something new and have seen the successes. So that's what we've heard anecdotally.
Thank you very much, Artie. I'm going to bring in Deputy Mayor Bramble.
Thank you, Chair. One of them was for our colleagues. So we're always looking at our data and looking at statistical neighbours. And I know in terms of exclusions, our data was comparatively at the same level as yours. So I just wanted to know, with the changes, the pragmatic changes that you've been talking about, and it's been really interesting, has your data aligned and reflecting those differences in the approach that you're taking? In terms of the schools and sign-ups, I think, as Jason rightly said, we'll go away and look at that, and we'll absolutely look at that, Jason and I. my reflection on what I would say around our primary schools is that many of them have nurture groups, rooms in them. So the mayor and I went to visit one a couple of months ago, actually, and I always get really excited because it's training that I did when I was in school and over 10 years ago now. So now I've made myself look really old. And another thing about our primary schools is that they do a lot of restorative justice. So there are different ways that we work with our children and young people. And I think if we look at the record of our primary school, Jason will politely tell me if I'm doing wrong, but I think over the last 5 years, I think we've had one permanent exclusion in over 5 years. So that tells a story. In our secondary schools, they're working really well to hold, support, and look after our children. Now, I'm not saying that our primary schools don't have to reflect and look at practice. What I'm saying is that there's a good model going in there. So even if they don't sign up to a particular programme, it's maybe because they're doing something bespoke in-house anyway. Thank you.
I think we're probably nearing the end of this item unless colleagues have got any other questions. Jason, did you want to come in?
Yeah, if I could just come in on that point, just to say, looking at the 2023-2024 data, Hackney had 0 exclusions at the primary level. There was one more recently that Deputy Mayor Bramble referenced, and it is an outlier. I think we can say that, and there are some specific circumstances around that, which I hope is going to be addressed through the work we're doing through the education strategy on the HEAL strategy that we spoke about. And you know, it's important to look at the numbers. We have to remember these are children, but when you look at primary suspensions, they're right near the bottom when you look compared to locally. So I think we know that there is good nurturing work happening in many of our primary schools. We know in secondary that's a different picture. Jackie's just reminding me actually to be clear and say we're actually the lowest in our statistical neighbor for primary from last year. Secondary for suspensions, we're in the middle. I don't think that's anything to be proud of, but it is important to note that. And of course, we know that we've got a systemic problem which is causing our exclusions to be high, which we hope to be able to address through the ongoing work over the next 3 years through the development of the HEAL strategy, which I spoke about previously. So I think it's important just to give this context.
I appreciate that. I really do, and I'm sure that many of us in the room, we've got connections to primary schools, whether we've got children in primary schools or governors at primary schools, and I think that we can see the work that is happening in our private primary schools is really positive. And I don't want the focus on the challenges within the secondary schools to appear as though it's detracting from that great work. But the fact that it is in such sharp contrast to what is going on in the secondary school setting is the reason why I don't think as a commission, we are able to take the spotlight off what's going on in secondary schools, because we know it can be done in primary schools. In fact, it sort of makes it even more tragic to think that the work's being done there, the child's on a positive trajectory, with the right support, only to go into a secondary school setting and not make it through past year 9. All of that investment, all of the work that we're hearing that's happening that the VRU is supporting, that's happening locally, that we're supporting as a local authority, for many of these children is not resulting in them seeing, their experience through the whole of education. And I think it's a really important point that Councillor Gordon made around the fact that we mustn't just focus on exclusions, because there are a lot of children who are within our schools who are not thriving. And we know this as a commission because we make a point of ensuring that we are focusing on children who are struggling with their mental health, with their emotional well-being, with special educational needs. And that's why we keep, focusing on these areas of work. Because we know that there's still quite a lot to be done, and I would love to see the work that is happening in our our primary settings extended into what we're seeing in our secondary schools, and that's arguably why we're here doing this piece of work. Jason, and then I think we're going to move on to our other activities.
I'll be brief. It's just to say I agree with that, and that's exactly why we've made it a key point in our education strategy to focus on this, and to bring the work of HEALS, which will develop, on a lot of the good work that we've already mentioned today that we are doing. And we know we need to broaden that offer out. So we definitely want to do that with our local voluntary sector groups. I know we've got some of them here tonight who we've already been speaking with, but also we can do that wider as well. So we are definitely acknowledging that issue. I think you're right. I think when you bring the two together, you can see. So let's work together on trying to address that issue in secondary whilst maintaining it in primary and keeping an eye on that over the next few years.
Thank you very much for that. Jason, very briefly, Councillor Ross.
Thank you. I'll just be brief. I just had a final question about the recommendations from the VIU and whether the council are planning to implement any of those.
Very briefly, please.
Sorry, again, we'll definitely take a look at them and we'll look at it in the context of the wider work that we're doing. I think we very much, enjoy a good relationship with the VRU. Deborah Robinson, who's our system leader for diversity and inclusion, has got a meeting coming up to look at how we can strengthen our work. So yeah, we're definitely open to future collaboration. I think the point is well made, though, that we do have to remember we've got, we're throwing a lot at our schools, and it's about making sure that whatever we do is intentional, it's the right intervention, and it lands well.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to move on to the local voluntary sector organisations, but before I do, I just want to say a huge thank you to those of you who've joined us online today, for all of the papers that you submitted in support of your contributions towards these items. There were a lot, you may not have seen this on camera, but there were a lot of nodding heads whilst many of you were speaking this evening, and I think that, we share your passion and enthusiasm for thinking really creatively about how we're able to address these emerging and developing challenges that we know that many of our children and young people are experiencing in schools, and your keenness to keep coming up with new strategies and approaches to doing that work. And we really respect the views and perspectives of those who have proximity to working with children and young people who struggle and who find being in education and life in general quite challenging. And we feel that much of that expertise in helping us to understand how we can address exclusions and inclusions in school lies with many of you, and that includes those of you also in the room this evening from the voluntary and community sector. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. You're more than welcome to stay, but it's also 9 o'clock, and I won't take offence if you drop off the call. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to welcome representatives from 3 local community organisations which support local children and young people who have been excluded or at risk of exclusion from school. Hackney Quest, Colette Allen, The Crib, Jeanette Collins, and Immediate Theatre, Joe Carter and Shemaine Humphrey. So each will individually present to the Commission, 7 to 8 minutes. We've not done particularly well on keeping to time, but if you can be as brief as possible, it would be much appreciated. So yeah, the work that these organisations do to support children and young people, you'll be setting out in your presentations the work that you do and the interface with local schools, your observations on what works best locally to enable children to remain in education, and what changes that may be necessary to the way that we work in Hackney to support more children to remain in education. So again, each will have 7 to 8 minutes. If we could try and be brief, that'd be much appreciated. And then we'll have, I'm not going to say how long for Q&A. We're going to have to try and keep that to time. So over to, should we start with Colette, please?
Sorry. Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having us here. I'm Colette Allen from Hackney Quest. I'm the CEO, but I've been at Hackney Quest for 24 years now, working in Hackney. Love Hackney. Couldn't think of working anywhere else. Love the community, young people. At heart, I'm a youth worker, although I've got this job title now, but I, still love working with young people. So yeah, I've Hackney Quest, we run, I've made some notes so that I 100% know what we do. We do obviously youth programs, we do a mentoring program, counselling, youth-led research, family education support, hardship support and youth leadership. And between 2005 and 2013, we had the honour of being approached by the Learning Trust and being asked to run a Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 exclusion provision. We didn't have much experience in education. We did it in a youth work way, and we actually ran it for 9 years, working really closely with Learning Trust with a wonderful lady called Liz Tonge. And it was just, we really saw the impact of exclusion, permanent exclusion. It was called fixed term, but suspensions on young people and their families, because we spent a lot of time with these young people and their families. And we really saw, and it's been a passion of mine and the team at Hackney Quest ever since, to kind of work with the community, with the schools, with the young people and families. And I think there's so many things that have been said today that I totally agree with. Me and Sophie have talked, sorry, Councillor Conway have spoken about this a lot as well. You know, we know that it's complicated. We know there's not one easy solution. We've worked as a voluntary sector in lots of different ways with various schools over the years. Some of us have go into schools to do mentoring. Schools will contact us if there's a young person at risk of exclusion. You know, we can go in and we can, you know, work with the family. They can get involved with our organisation or one of the other organisations. And that can actually very often be the solution. You know, we've seen it, you know, just having, you know, an external voluntary sector organisation that's been embedded in the community. We've been around 24 years, these guys longer, I think. We know the families, we know our communities, they trust us. You know, we are place-based trusted organisations. That we tend to have the same people working with us. You know, my team have been with me for, you know, between 15 and 20 years. People know us, they know these guys. And I think, you know, we work really well with Hackney Education, but with schools, it's very much dependent on the school. And this whole sort of like discussion, which, you know, some of the others presented on about this relational approach, you know, that's what we do. That's what we see. We see it works. We don't generally have that many problems in our organisations with young people. We ran an exclusion provision with permanent excluded young people for 9 years. We never had a fight. You know, we never had any violence. We never had to get the police. You know, we ran a pupil referral unit, but it wasn't seen as such. It was an alternative provision, and it was a visionary model actually, because Liz Tonge, who'd run the pupil referral units, she knew that just didn't work. It doesn't work to take all young people who are feeling rubbish about themselves because they've been excluded from school, whose families are really upset with them, and who've been sort of treated quite badly, quite often by the school, and pop them all into one place. So they're all in the same position. And having that model of sort of young people going to different provisions, you know, some education providers, some voluntary sector providers, it really works. And I feel like I'm always saying this, that really works. You know, it really worked well working, you know, all of us working together, because we have these relationships with young people and families. And I think that's really important because, you know, they're so anxious and stressed when they're going through not just permanent exclusion or suspension, and they're continuously being put into behaviour support unit. They're missing out in their education. You know, what Councillor Conway said, and you know, quite a few said, it's not just the figures on the exclusions, it's what's happening to them in the schools. And not all, we work really well with some of the schools and some of the academies, but there are a few that are damaging children. And we've been talking about that for years. They're actually damaging children. The children are coming out with serious mental health issues, not getting an education. You know, on paper, the results look good, but what's actually happening to the children and families while they're in that education provider, it's sickening, actually. You know, when we hear the things that are being said to our children by teachers, by head teachers, by senior leaders in some of these schools, it's disgusting, it's racist. They're not, you know, listening. There's a complete lack of the children having rights in these schools. They just feel like they have no rights. The parents have no rights. They're not allowed to challenge. And it's, you know, I'm encouraged by this approach. You know, I'm encouraged that things are changing in some boroughs. I'm slightly discouraged, although obviously I love working with the education providers in Hackney, that Hackney's not taking it up. And I do understand, you know, some of those reasons. It's just overwhelming. I'm also a governor of a school myself, which is a rights respected school in Redbridge. So I do see myself as a governor how that model has really worked, and they have one of the highest results in the country, and they have, you know, and I think, you know, that's, I've said it quite a long time. Do you look at like other London boroughs? And I know that obviously from what Paddy was saying there that we do. Obviously we're very local, so it's interesting to see sort of the London perspective and the national perspective on this as well. But yeah, I think that's about all I've got to say.
Thank you very much, Colette. Jeanette, please.
My name, oh, sorry.
I can do that one as well.
Louder for yours. Hi, my name is Jeanette Collins, MBE, and I've worked at, I set the crib up in 1999. We set the crib up around antisocial behaviour. And our approach of working with young people is like maybe like the nurturing approach. We think that we have to work with young people, with the whole family. You can't just work with a young person on their own. And the work that we do in schools at the moment, we've got a parent's voice, where we work with parents to empower parents to be able to go into the school and challenge and advocate for their child, and we go along with them to advocate for their children. We support the schools in the sense of, we're attached to 2 schools at the moment over in the Beauvoir Board, and we support the schools in the sense of when a young person is being excluded, well, they call it internal exclusion, and they have to go to another school out of borough. So what we decided to do was to approach the school's called Waterside, approach the school and we said to the school, some of the children are frightened to go across borough because knife crime and violence. So we decided to open the project up in the day and have the children come and study in the day at the project for their exclusion time. And when they went back to school, they said that they couldn't believe the amount of work they'd done. And I think it was just the environment that they were in, and maybe the people that was working with them, alongside them. We do anti-bullying workshops in school. We do workshops around relationships, and the workshops are not just about relationships with your peers or your partner. It's more guided relationships with your external community, like like your relationship with your youth worker, your relationship with your teacher, your relationship with your parent. So we look at relationships on a whole when we go into schools. We've worked in several pupil referral units and delivered workshops around, like I said, relationships, around Baby Me Not. We've done workshops around relationships with teachers and young people. We've got a concept called Trading Places, which we use with police and young people, and we developed the program Trading Places with young people around teachers and young people. And the school that we went to a school in Islington, it's called Project 16. It's a pupil referral unit, and it was chaotic in there. When we went in there and delivered the workshop, the teachers started realizing that their behavior was impacting the young people. So basically, the behavior that the child was projecting, they were projecting the same kind of behavior. So it made it like that. Then in the end, the school set the children, the young people at the school set up it's like a youth forum, but it's not. It's called something else. So we do work like that. We do work with the families, like I said, going into the schools, being advocates for the families. We've found there's a big high rise in exclusions amongst Algerian children, Turkish children, and not so much Somalian, yeah, not so much West Indian and Caribbean. The climate has changed, and the climate's changed in the sense of that more young women are getting excluded from school. Compared to their peers, like the male counterpart, but they're getting excluded from school. We're setting up a program which we're trying to roll out in September, and quite a few schools are really interested in it. It's an early intervention program. It's about bringing young people into the schools, into the year 6, and explaining to year 6. Because don't forget, if you're at junior school and you're running around, playing with your friend, touching their hair, hugging them and everything else, then the next thing you go into an environment where you've got to stand in line, you can't touch your friend, you can't look at your friend, you can't do this, you can't move backwards, you can't move forward. That's not a right environment. But when they explain it, we've been to the open days of secondary school, when they explain it to the parents. When you go to and you explain it to the parents, they don't explain it like that. All they talk about is your sanctions, your sanctions, your sanctions, your sanctions. And the kids are just sitting there thinking, the kids are oblivious to what they're actually saying. And some of the parents, their second language is English. Do you understand what I'm saying? So they don't understand what's really going on. And when they put their child in that environment and everything starts to like, a child went to school, his hair wasn't cut short enough. His mum painted hair on his head, painted hair on so as he'd fit in. And he still got sanctioned. And yet he allowed his mum to paint hair on his head. So it's these things that I think you need to have early intervention. And like you were saying, Councillor Conway, like you were saying, that children that know that happy, nurturing approach they give in primary school, then you can carry that through to secondary school. As long as that child can understand the fact that once you go to secondary school, your life has changed. It's not like, like you said, so once you go to work, your life will change, but it changes drastically when they go from primary to secondary school. It really does for a child. And it is very daunting, and it affects their mental health and well-being. Because if we as care providers did to a child what happens in schools, you can't lock your child in a room on their own. And that child, we say, tell someone if someone does something wrong to you, but we're allowing our schools to do that, who are acting as parental parochial. So I feel that we need to start from early and then move up into secondary. And I think we should focus on nurturing and relationships. The relationship had a big impact on the child's life. Yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you very much, Jeanette. And finally, Jo Charmaine, please.
Hi, I'm Jo from Immediate Theatre, and actually I did deliver initially on our inclusion projects, but quickly joined by Charmaine.
Charmaine, the participation manager, and oversee the delivery team.
Yeah, and also Shakila, the chair of the trustees, has decided to join us this evening, which is great because actually Shakila first joined us when she was excluded from school, and then became part of our youth board, part of the Youth Futures here, and is now a governor at a secondary school. So, you know, we've seen many young people flourish through our programs, and actually just would point out that a lot of the young people that we've worked with who've been excluded from school are highly intelligent and have a huge contribution to make to the community. So I just very briefly, you know, Immediate Theatre just doesn't only work with young people, we also work with unemployed adults and with older people and have a really deep understanding and knowledge of the community. And I think the kind of role of locally based organisations that have spoken here are really important. Often when the Hackney talks about working with partners, as it does mention a lot, it feels as though those are going to be big kind of national organisations with a tick box way of working. And that kind of doesn't really touch on the relationships that the community sector have. And Hackney has a really strong community sector. But often when we struggle so much to get into schools and to be respected, and I honestly feel like I'm an excluded young person bothering the school, and I don't feel we're given respect. We're talked about as almost like we're volunteers. We're not. Many of us are highly trained and experienced professionals, but experienced people who understand the world. And I feel as though it's really important that we're seen as part of the picture, because we already have a relationship with a lot of these young people. We don't just meet them through this moment. Young people we're engaging with then have problems at school. So I was just going to mention, actually, I'm going to talk about interactions briefly, but we also do a Key Stage 1 project called Speech Bubbles, actually highly used across other schools, but it's about that kind of speech and language and early intervention, and we've seen that work very well in Hackney. But we've been providing interactions for over 25 years now, which uses the arts as an approach to help young people explore their emotions, manage their emotions, develop interaction with other people, social interaction. But really importantly, actually it is about this rights, because we really do listen to those young people and then guide them to shape what they have to say into a way that they can come to council meetings, which they often now do, and that they can kind of speak on the behalf of their peers. As I said, we've had, you know, many successes. Shakila is here to prove that, but also many young people who then we've offered employment to, who've gone on to be youth workers. But on the other hand, you know, we've been in this system for a long time. We've seen the changes. You know, we had the virtual crew. We've had different things going on. I remember a time when if you mentioned mental health issues in an exclusion setting, everybody looked at you like you were mad. And now we have these changes, but I still can't really see that we've changed how we work with young people, despite all these different interventions that have come in. And yeah, we've had many successes, but we have also seen too many young people not succeed, and all of us have lost young people, and that is incredibly hard on the workforce. It is really, really hard to find workers who are capable of this work. And the problems we have engaging with schools and how we're treated by schools exacerbates that, I would say, because we feel so disrespected, and yet we're trying to maintain respect for the young people and their families, and the importance of that. I think I've kind of covered everything. Charmaine, did you want to add
I'm just
everything?
going to say that we tailor our workshops to what the school's needs are. So all of our workshops are tailored to each individual provision that we're going into.
But then we can go in and say, oh, can you change your provision this week? Could you come at a different time? Or we've got a different class we want you to work with. But the other thing is that it's also really important that we work outside of schools, and actually has recently successfully been running regular workshops online because of the issues young people have in travelling around the borough. And it's a very good way to then integrate them into holiday projects and other things like that where they come face to face. I think the other thing is that we don't offer, we offer a 6-week intervention in schools on the whole, but then once young people know us, we are there forever. You know, it's not a, here's your intervention and you should be better at the end of it. And I think that's vital for so many young people, that they know they can come back, and they can come back year after year. They can introduce their children to the project. It's a relationship, and a lot of the young people we work with call us family, call us home. And that's the same for all of our organisations. So I think I've covered everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, can I ask you to turn your mic off? Thank you very much. Thank you all for your contributions and for the incredible work that you do, and for speaking so openly and candidly with us about your experiences of working with excluded young people and the context that they're coming from and their experiences at school and your experiences as experienced professionals. It's really disheartening to hear that you feel you aren't highly regarded or respected. Yeah, that was very difficult to hear, I think, for many of us. Members of the Commission, we're going to try and get through as many questions as possible. So if we can keep questions succinct and answers too, please. I think we've got Janine and then Councillor Troughton, and I've jotted down the names of the others.
Thank you for sharing your work. I know all of your organisations very well, and I really do appreciate all you've done over the years in Hackney. I just want to echo Councillor Conway's point around disrespect. I think it's absolutely unacceptable. I am keen to understand in terms of, I guess it goes back to my earlier point around oversight. What is your mechanism in terms of who do you go to in terms of where you are having difficulties accessing schools, or where you're just dealing with disrespect? Do you go to Hackney Education? You know, what does that look like? Is what I'm trying to understand.
Sorry, can I just take a further question from Councillor Troughton, please?
I mean, thank you, Chair, and thank you all for, your presentations. And to be honest, it really resonated with me when you talked about the difficulty of getting into schools, because although it's a different type of work that I do, I've experienced exactly the same thing. And I just really don't understand why, you're qualified, you've got a clear offer, you've got success on your side, a track record, longevity. What is the barrier? Have you any ideas? And I suppose I want to throw that over to the education department and say, how can we break down these barriers, and really take advantage of our local offer? Because actually our local services understand our community so much better than people who are coming, from national organisations. You've probably already got the links, to bring people on board. If you walk into school, there will be children there that you already know. So, that there are barriers, in your way is so frustrating. So, I don't know.
Can I just also add to that, if you are able to come in on that, Jason, just noting the fact that I feel that what we're hearing from those in the room today is echoed by the experiences of those partners of the violence reduction unit who were saying that they were experiencing this similar challenges around getting into the schools and feeling as though they were being battered away. So this feels like it's, And I think it feels like it echoes to some degree some of the experiences that we even have as a local authority. I mean, not that it's perhaps been stated quite that explicitly, but it does feel as though there are some of our schools that we are struggling to get into or to have an impact in. So any contributions on that would be useful.
Sorry, Chair, if I can just come back on that point, because schools are always saying they haven't got resources, and yet you offer them resources and they say, well, you know.
So over to you for the, yeah, it's a similar question. Can we start with the voluntary and community partners, please?
Yeah, with the getting into schools, I think there's two aspects of it. Like, so these guys do deliver in schools, we don't. What we do is we work with schools to go to meetings with the families, support the young person. Some schools will invite us in if they have a young person that they feel may be at risk of exclusion, even though they don't really want to exclude them, but they're sort of heading down that path. Some schools are really open to that. Some schools approach us. We've got a great team that do that. We've had really, really great results, as in young people who are about to be excluded, finishing school and getting their, you know, not that they get their GCSEs, finishing school happily, having mentoring with us, you know, becoming part of Hackney Quest, becoming youth leaders. We've had lots of those kind of situations. We have some schools that just wouldn't even let us go to a meeting with a parent, even though the parent's desperate to have us there. Our local academy, the one that's under the investigation at the moment, they don't want anybody in there. You know, I know they work with different teams, but they don't want people going in. They want, I think now my conclusion after 10 years is they don't want us to see what they're doing, because I've experienced that myself. I've been told in a meeting with a parent that her child was the worst child in the school. He was 11 years old. And when I questioned the teacher, what do you mean? Like, why? He said, well, he's got 80 behaviour points. And this is what we were talking about. When that guy was saying about low level, the 80 behaviour points for not doing his homework to the Mossburn standard. I'm still horrified by that. That was probably sick. The mum cried all the way through the meeting. She cried the whole way through. When we came out, she said, well, that was the best meeting that I've ever had because you were there with me. I was horrified, absolutely horrified that a teacher thought that was okay to say that to a parent. So yeah, that's the issue that we as a Hackney Quest have. Not in all schools, just in probably one actually. Yeah, but these guys have different experience because they're offering to go and deliver in the schools. Plus, they also do the work that we do.
Okay, so
I think I'm answering the first question about, you know, right now, we don't have anybody to go to in Hackney Education. Yeah, we have done.
How we reach out to the schools is we reach out to whoever's in charge of PSHE, citizenship, or whoever is the point of contact for young people, whether or not there's a unit in the school, and then that they would be the people that we would first of all email, would then present ourselves at the school, try to, you know, see if we can actually, we'd go knocking at the door, seeing if we can just run up at the school and try and get face to face with that point of contact. Yeah, that's what happens a lot of the time. We do bombard with emails.
I do have a good relationship with Sophie McElroy on CAMS, but that's because I'm part of the VCS leadership team. So I've kind of found another way in, and then she will go to schools that she thinks we're right for. But there's no comeback on they didn't respond.
Before others come in, I just wanted to, I skipped past something I was supposed to have said earlier on, which is that can we avoid naming individual schools or individuals? Yeah.
Yeah, your question, what you were saying. It took me 10 years to get into a school, and how I got into the school, I'm not one that gets put off that easily. So how I got in, a parent was going for an open day, so I tagged along with her. So that's how I got into the school. And you're saying about that we've got a good sector, a voluntary sector of people, like with Collette's group, like Hackney Quest, if I've got a young person that I know that's at a school that needs mentoring, I'm not going to go and set up a mentoring group just like that. So I'm going to get a mentor for you because I know Hackney Quest offers mentors, which have used a couple of their mentors for our young people, but to build up their attainment in schools. So what we do, we work off of each other. You know, with all our organisations, we work in partnership with each other. But like you were saying about the bigger organizations, it's quite sad that when you actually get to do work in the schools, that when you go in, you see these larger organizations in there and you think to yourself, well, why have they discriminated here? Why have they discriminated against us? Considering that our offer was free. And I'm talking free. We'll go, we'll do this for you for free. We just want to help. So now, the way I get into schools now is, like I said to you, through my parents' voice group. So I go in as an advocate. Then once I'm in as an advocate, then I'll go along and I'll help. Not ask the teachers in school, they'd like us to help the young person and help more with their mum, help on the relationships with them. But not all the time you get a yes. But like I said to you, I don't really take no kindly. I just keep badgering on. So that's how I do it. Persistence.
Yeah. Sometimes we take the lunchtime slot. Did anyone know there was a lunchtime slot? But yeah, there is. So you go in and you run your workshop during lunchtime for whoever wants to attend. The school don't specifically say these people have to come. They open it out and you get whoever turns up on that day.
Thank you very much. Very briefly, if Jason, we don't have very long left, so if we can try to keep contributions to minimums. Jason and Deputy Mayor Bramble, and then another round of questions, please.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just come in on that. And, it is really frustrating to hear some of the stories that we're hearing tonight. I think we need to approach this as a system, in a system-wide way. And, as mentioned before, when we were studying what authorities were doing that had, significantly lower exclusion rates than we did, we could see that there was a really good tie-in with our voluntary sector groups. And I do recognize the professionalism with them. In fact, we noticed that some of those authorities, and we heard from some of them in previous meetings, were actually commissioning some of the Hackney-based groups in order to do that. So we are already working on that. I think we have to identify that there are some good relationships with some groups in some schools, and what we need to do is identify them and learn from them as a good example that we could then use to spread across the schools. And I think back to the roundtable that Deputy Mayor Bramble hosted in Parliament back in February, where we sat down with some of the groups. Those of us in Hackney Education, me new in the role, but also we invited 2 head teachers to come with us. And it was interesting, the thinking that we had to do around that, whether or not it was right and it was time to do that. We took the chair and vice chair, we invited them from the Head Teachers Forum. But what I would say is, let's go back to the word that we've been using today, relationships. What we need to do is support you to build relationships between your sector and the schools. And what we've been doing is spending the year building my relationship with the schools. So what I suggest to you we could do is sit down and talk about how could we get you around the table in a solution-focused way, using HEALS, but also just naturally, because you offer a lot of your work, and to hear that you're offering free support and that's being turned away. It's either not being understood properly, or maybe there is respect that needs to be built. But let's get around the table and let's build relationships between your sector and the schools. And let's identify clear people. And as we unveil HEALS, I think that structure of who you can speak to will be clear. We'll make sure you have really clear points of contact in order to do that.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor Bramble, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was just reflecting on that. I think the first thing to say is, when you have a negative experience in a school, do let us know. We can only address and advocate on your behalf on the things that we know. Jason, myself, and the team are constantly in schools, the SIPs, the school improvement officers, are always in schools, and we can raise those things once we know them, because no one should feel like felt like they're unprofessional or strange or treated in a hostile way if they're advocating for all of our children and young people. That's the first thing. Something that's sprung to mind, which is slightly different, is in one of the secondary schools, there was a global Black and majority parents group that started, but they invite all parents from any background in, and that parent group is now working with primary schools, and goes to the heart of what Jason said. There are examples that we've heard of tonight that really shouldn't be happening. Let us know the individual schools and we can take that forward. But there are some really good schools that are doing partnerships with community groups in the secondary sector. So it's how we shine a light on that and get them to share that good practice to build the trust and capacity across the system. Because actually, and last thing I'd say, the work that Jason and I are doing around HEALS, providing that framework, is to highlight and spotlight all the work that community sector is doing. Because if schools don't engage with you, there's a missed opportunity to help the children and families that we know need the support that you can offer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I've got a question which is around good practice and focusing quite specifically on our secondary schools, because I know that I don't want to take it just as a given that everything's perfect in our primary schools, but I think that we recognise that there's a lot more of that great work happening in that space. But in your experience, what have you learnt about the different approaches to behaviour management across our schools, without naming names? And if you do have any examples of where you think it's working really well, and what does that look like? Can I leave you with that one, and then Councillor Gordon?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentations and, spending the time from your sort of busy and really respected organisations to come and speak to us tonight. I hope you're also cheered like I am to hear from commitments from Director of Education and Deputy Mayor Bramble. So I just really wanted to give you the opportunity maybe of telling us of any work you've done so far in shaping the sort of HEALS programme for a more sort of systemic approach, and also maybe if you've got any asks or requests of how you think the partnership working should work in a sort of ideal world. It'd be good to hear them. Thank you.
Please do. Yeah.
Love answering questions. Good practice. I'm just going to give you an example of good practice. There was a lot of phone robberies outside a particular school, right? So we worked in partnership with the police and in partnership with the school, and we created a school, like it was like a WhatsApp group for parents who was worried about their children. And then we linked it into school. So every Friday we went into the school and we sat down, and parents spoke to the head about problems that they were having with their phone snatching, problems the children was having in school, and the safety around the school. So that worked really well, but that was because there was an incident. So we was able to not parachuting on that. And the other thing I think is good practice when they opened their doors to us and let us help when it came to the young person being excluded from school. Rather than send them across the borough, they used the resources that was in their own borough to be able to house the young person, rather than sending them across the borough and risk his safety. So that to me is good practice. And I think when they let you in to do assemblies, because I think in an assembly, when you're allowed to actually speak out in an assembly, right, and then you shut and speak out and show that, like I said, you come in and speak out about what you're going to offer in the area. That's quite good practice, but it's just like little one-offs. What I would see as good working relationship is to have like some of our organisations embedded into your school as a go-to person. So if something happens, say like a parent comes in or a child is distressed about a parent, and as a go-to person that you refer the family to, rather than go straight to authorities. Because that's what some of the families get worried about as well. They go straight to the authorities. So it takes the power out of that family's hand, rather than there's organisations in your area already that you can actually go to that can be there constantly as well to support. Because our work, we support on a Saturday and Sunday, to be honest with you. Yeah, so we're there constantly as well. So to me, that is good practice. And good practice is like about relationships. just building a nice relationship. And I think the work that Hills are doing, when I came out of that first meeting, I went to the school, I tried to recruit some schools, you know, to get on board with Hills, because it's a good initiative. Yeah, I did recruit people, but it's a good initiative. Do you know what I mean? And if it's spearheaded by Jason and the council, to be able to open the way for us to be able to go in, I think it would be better than rather than us being there going bang, bang, bang on the door. Do you know what I mean? You need.
I was just going to give an example of a really good thing that didn't happen in Hackney, but I had some funding not to work in Hackney. I made one phone call to their education department, was put through to somebody who had a speciality in drama. I explained what I wanted to do. He said, oh, I know exactly the teacher you'd like to work with. I'll introduce you. And I met the teacher a week later and we did a fabulous project, which we then repeated in other boroughs. I didn't know the guy, but he knew the schools.
Yeah, I'm sorry, just let the others contribute and we'll come to you, Jason. Sorry, did you, Charmaine, did you want to?
Or back to Hills. So I think that as a voluntary organisation, if we sit down more, don't forget it's quite relatively new. So we've had a couple of meetings, and I'm totally sold on it, and you're sold on it as well, aren't you? Hills. Yeah, did you know about you go to Hills meetings? Yes. Well, I am sold on it.
Not been invited yet.
But I'm sold on it. But you're not being excluded though.
I will.
Yeah. But I'm sold on it because I think, like I said, I think you need that sometimes schools, authority sometimes listen to authority. And I think that even though we're all professional people, I think we're seen by the schools as a lesser level, a lower level of intervention. Because I think that our interventions that we do with young people and prevention is more a social. It's more around the social well-being of the family and child.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference is with our organisations, because they hear the word theatre, they disengage even more. Because they just think, oh, you're just going to do jazz hands. So
yeah, but theatre, to me, drama is a way of being able to engage with young people. Because sometimes people and adults need to act out how they feel.
100%.
Jason, can I ask if you can, I've got 4 names for questions, because I'm conscious I don't want to have to extend this meeting. So can I ask you to come in after, if you can just jot your notes down, because I'm sure there may be some other points that come from the other contributors. And if I can be really strict and ask if we can get one of you to answer each of these next questions. So we've got Councillor Turbot-Deloff, Councillor Pinkerton, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. Thank you. I do really commend your honesty, and I think that's been said by colleagues. It really is important for us to hear your stories. I mean, it seems like among yourselves, you have over 70 years experience or expertise in the richness of the knowledge that you have about the work with young people. So I really do wonder how you feel about, despite all of this expertise, you still see the increasing levels of detentions and exclusions, and how that makes you feel. As a former mental health champion, I've seen firsthand how you work. So my question is, in the spirit of this very much appreciated honesty, so what do you believe that we as a council and system need to do differently? To truly bring about the change that will end the kind of stories that you share with us tonight? Thank you.
And Councillor Pinkerton, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a bit about what you said about advocating for and empowering pupils, parents, carers. I just wondered if you've ever seen any examples of that type of work, of, you know, the more empowered parent, carer, pupil, their kind of, any examples of where their choice, where their actions has actually led to change in the policies of schools. Is that something we could be hopeful as a way of kind of driving policy change from our schools? Thank you.
Over to you. I appreciate it. You'll now have to deliberate over who would be the best person to answer.
Thank you. So I'll answer your question. I don't really have the answer. I think we've seen so many different iterations of sort of education, schools. We're still sort of doing the same thing and expanding our services to meet the needs of the young people and the families, and the communities we support. So that's why we do what we do. I think, you know, working with the voluntary sector, you know, as these guys have said, you know, obviously being involved with the New Heels programme, that kind of thing. And I think sometimes, I suppose we felt, and I felt over the years, quite often we're like a tick box or an add-on. Oh, we better invite the voluntary sector along, or we've got to get their opinion, rather than it being the first sort of approach. And I think that's no disrespect to anybody, because I can understand everybody's just busy and hectic, and we're just there in our little our spaces doing our thing. But I think that's always been a bit of a frustration of ours. It's like we care so much. You know, we know we work with people that care so much that actually just working together could really just stop that. I'm just thinking the example of that young woman. You know, she ended up doing fine. You know, she was about to be permanently excluded. Just think about, you know, it's why we set up Hackney Rep, which was a consortium of 12 voluntary sector organisations for exactly this purpose, so we could all work together. And it wasn't even about reducing exclusions, it was supporting young people and families, not to go through what we've seen so many go through. Just remember us, and thank you for inviting us. I really do appreciate being here.
If I could answer the what do you think we should do, as I've just been passed a note by my chair. Well, I've got one thing myself, is that I was involved in the education and healthcare plan, and I was asked to look at it, and I commented that they were not using the appropriate language about the voluntary sector, and it wasn't top of the agenda. I was invited to rewrite it, which I did very succinctly, and talked to a lot of other people, and we all agreed it. And then I went to the policy team here, and they went, but Jo, that's already in the policy about how you should be working. It's just that not all teams in the council apply it. So one thing is, there is some really great work being done in Hackney about how you should be including the voluntary sector, but it is not being applied across the board. So apply it. And the other is, from Shakila, is stop talking about it and change it. There's been an awful lot of talking about young black men. How nice.
Years.
Yeah, let's do it.
Sorry, I've now forgotten Councillor Pinkerton's question. Has that been?
Hi again. Empowering parents. We've got a large Turkish community at our organisation, and the school, and quite a few of the parents, well, some of our parents have had counselling through certain bodies in this room, and we set up a parents group for the parents whose children were being excluded from schools and finding it very difficult to be able to challenge the teachers at school because their second language is English. So one of our parents from our Parents' Voice decided to come along and be an advocate as well. And we empowered her so much. We empowered her so much that she set up her own group of people in the school. So she goes now on her own and advocates for the Turkish community. She mentors some of the young people as well. And then she's got a very, very good, because her children go to school, she's got a very great relationship with the school and herself, and it's built the bridges with the school and the Turkish community, although they still have exclusions. They still have exclusions, and they've still got a long way to go. But it's a start. She's on, we've empowered her that much that she's on that first runner to be able to just go, fly a bit higher. But that's how you empower parents. You empower parents by sitting down, talking to them at coffee mornings, explaining to them that we're always there to help them. But it's not all, you advocate for them, but you should be able to advocate for them enough that in the end they can fly themselves and go there and do their thing for themselves. But that's what this woman's doing now. And she, honestly, I'm so proud of her. Really, really proud of her. And like I said, she's created, it's changing the school. Yeah, she's created a very good relationship in the school. That's how you empower parents.
Thank you very much. Final 3 questions. Councillor Ross, Councillor Binny Lubbock, Councillor Susarunga.
I'll be very brief. Thank you, Chair. But I just firstly want to thank you for your amazing work that you're doing with our children and young people and for being here this evening. I'd like to hear your perspective on what you think Hackney's priorities should be in promoting greater inclusion in our schools. Thank you.
Thank you, and yeah, I'd like to add my thanks to all the work you're doing. I guess there's two issues. It sounds like the HEALS program could be very good at opening that door that feels like it's quite closed at the moment, but I imagine that some schools still won't be open to engaging or changing the way that they approach to a more respect, rights and relationship way of thinking. And obviously they're also not advertising very well that they're, sanction oriented and that's, going to have an impact on the child. I wonder if the ones that do engage are going to be able to, or assisted to advertise the fact that they are engaging with that kind of work and are providing, some sort of a safety net for when things aren't going as well as they could be. And I also would like to know if there's an increase in demand. I'm assuming that's the case for a lot of this work, and probably a restriction of resources. And it feels like over the years, Hackney has lost a huge number of youth workers. And as you say, it's not easy work for the youth workers to do. So I'm just wondering if you think that there is an issue also around provision more broadly.
And sorry, finally, Councillor Sissoyarunga, sorry to bolt 3 questions on.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I can ask my good friends over there a question anytime, because I got off my chair, I walked out of my office, I walked into the place of work where you work, and I learnt together with you, and that is what you call a foundation.
You've got to set everybody off now, Councillor Sissoyarunga. Typical. Okay, handing over to the 4 of you for those 2 questions.
I think Hackney's priorities should be, just when it comes to young people in schools. Yeah, I think Hackney's priority should be around children and young people's mental health and well-being, and how the schools. We can't just say school, because you can be allowed in certain schools. You can be. But I just think it's the academies, to be honest with you. I'm going to have to just use that word. I have to use the word academy. Yeah, well, I just have to use it though, right? And I think that their priority should be around children and young people, safeguarding children and young people when they're in the school environment, because being in that school environment, young people are coming out of that school environment basically tortured. That's the only way I can say, tortured. And that's the only word I can use. Not all young people, because some young people can adapt in that environment. But you've got young people that have not been statemented, haven't had, a SEN, EHC plan, that's the EHC plan. We've got a young woman that was going into school, running out of school, running in, running out, running. And they did do a lot to support her, I have to admit. I have to commend this school. They did do a lot to support her. But it was what they kept on saying to you, they kept on using that word, you're mental to her, right? And what she did, they said to her, you can't come into school because we can't safeguard you, you're not allowed in, but you can come in and sit in that room in there, the door open. So I used to go in and sit in the room with her. Do you know that child, when she's done her GCSEs, come out as a 9, come out of 9s? You know what I mean? A 9 is it an A star? And that's not A, yeah. And she came out of that because what I kept on saying to her is, don't let the school take away what you want to be when you get older. Hold on to that. Do you know what I mean? That's what I kept on saying to her every day. Do not let them take away what you want to be. And they kept on saying, you're going to come back in school soon. You're going to come back in school for the whole day. And they never let her back in. And that was affecting their mental health and well-being. So she started, and that's when they start slashing themselves. So to me, I think that these are the things, the actions that we need to actually concentrate on about the children's mental health and well-being when they're in school, not when they're with their parents, when they're actually inside the school. How the school affects their mental health and well-being. It's sad, very, very sad to see. That's what their priority. But sorry, That's what Hackney's priority should be.
I was just going to try and respond to the increase in demand, an increase in need. It's hard because I feel that in recent years, a lot of the schools have tried to build walls around their young people. So we might notice an increase in need, but it's harder to sometimes to find and engage with it. Do you appreciate what I'm saying? That I believe that a community is responsible for raising its children, not just the schools.
Yeah, that it's not their young people, it's our
And
young
yes,
people.
they're all of our young people, not that school's young people. And so I think, you know, in a way, what we're saying, like saying to the head teachers, we want to work with you because it's not just you, it's all of us. And so maybe really, I would say the priority is to make the schools feel that we're all in this together, and that they're not the only ones. So yeah, there are less resources, but yeah.
But also the hours that we work are different from school's hours. We do school's hours, but we also do outside of school's hours. So when we make those contacts with those young people, if we meet them inside, they can also access us outside. And that's how our project runs, that we specifically go in, run our project for a period of time, and then we refer them into our youth theatres or into a specific group, or either our online group that we have. Some young people that don't want to travel will come to the online group and they can access us, you know, out of those, whatever it is, 9 to 6 hours, they know that they can get us until at least 11, maybe later.
I'm going to have to bring this to a close. We're not allowed to go beyond 10 o'clock unless we extend the meeting, and I can't imagine that people would want to stay here for longer. I tell you what, if I can fly through everything else and we've got any moments, but also like we're all going to be in this room together after this meeting. It's just that I'm not allowed for this meeting to go beyond 10 o'clock. And Jason, if it has to be like 30 seconds, we've got 8 minutes and I've still got 2 other items that I have to go through.
I will do this as quickly as possible. We're consulting now in our 3-year strategy with priorities that picks up on what colleagues have said. I'm going to be HEALS as part of that. HEALS is the conversations have been organic, so maybe not all groups have the full information, but you will get a letter from me within the next week. There's a draft on my computer that I worked on today. 2 things I want to suggest though. As I said, I now meet with secondary heads regularly, and I will facilitate meetings for you to have with them. But one thing we can do now is that you were talking about, you know, your name might suggest that people don't fully understand what you do. We may have old directories. Let's put together a very clear directory of all your groups and what you do and some of your successes. We can do that over the coming weeks. This is a quick one. And I will get that out to schools. And I think that's a starting point because I'm not sure that exists currently right now. So let's make sure that we get it online, and we get it out there. And I'm asking you and your colleagues to help me do that, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us.
Chair, can I just thank the organisations for all that they do for us, and some of them are known to us and some of them are funded by the council, which so we really do believe in the work that you're doing. A mention was made about youth provision, but it's really important to say that all of our youth hubs remain open and we have a strong offer, and actually we're still one of the highest local authorities that resource youth provision. So I think that's really important when that comment was made about losing social youth workers was made that I spoke to that. Thank you all so much. And Jeanette, thank you. I'm glad that you're totally sold. You speak your mind, so it's good that you're totally sold out on that. That's really great. Thank you all for your engagement. And Chair, last thing that I need to say is that we've done HEALS so that we can find a better way of working with the voluntary sector and bringing them in-house to work with us with our schools. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, I'm honestly, nobody else. I've got 6 minutes and there's a lot of words on here, so I'm going to be really strict. No other microphones on, please. I need to finish this meeting. Thank you all so much for joining us and for all of the incredible work that you do with our children in the borough. You know that, you know, you hold a a really important place for us all as a commission and as individuals, and residents in Hackney and parents and carers. So thank you all. Thank you. Item 5, the work programme. The Commission reviews and updates the work programme each year to ensure that this remains current and reflects the needs and concerns of the local community. To support the programme development, there has been a public engagement exercise which has been supported by consultative meetings held by the Chair and Vice Chair. For transparency, suggestions from all sources are presented within the agenda pack. Given the commitments of the review and rollover of items, there are relatively few spaces on the work programme for this year, and the engagement has been proportionate to reflect this. Changes agreed since last meeting are housing support for families of children with special educational needs and disabilities, scheduled for March 2026, with living in Hackney. As it's a joint meeting, it may be best to take the update on housing support for care leavers at the same meeting, the 26th of March, and it will be, as it will be the same officers. Improving outcomes for young Black boys and girls, the Chair and Vice Chair have met with the Community Accountability Board leads for this programme and have agreed to incorporate this into the work programme. A date is to be agreed, and the Chair and Vice Chair will plan to meet with the Chair of Skills, Economy and Growth to explore a joint scrutiny of employment and training topics suggested at the last meeting. There are a few remaining slots on the work programme, but there will be opportunities to cover more areas through the Cabinet Q&A process. Do members have any reflections or priorities from the topic suggestions that they would like to consider? We're not going to be able to do that now, so please can you share that with Martin and I via email following this meeting. Finally, item 6, minutes from the previous meeting. Minutes from the previous meeting of the Commission are enclosed for members to note and agree, and they are June the 2nd, 2025. Do members have any matters arising from the minutes? Members approve the minutes. Councillor Ross?
Just quickly, my name isn't on the attendee list, so if I could just be added.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, Councillor Mackenzie also. Thank you. Final item, item 7, any other business? No other business apart from next meeting is you lucky things on my birthday. That's how much I love you. On the 15th of September, 2025. I'm now going to call this meeting to a close. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, we have any other business?
I don't often do this, Chair, but I really do want to be minuted that I really do commend your efforts to make sure that we're not rushing, especially with this item, because often we rush and we don't get to really important information. So I do want that to be minuted, my appreciation for that, Chair. Thank you. Which I don't often do, as probably people know. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Marcel.